Okay, is everybody here?
Yes, we're all here.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, let's call the Los Altos City Council regular meeting of Tuesday, September 21st, 2021 to order at 7:03 p.m. City Clerk, can you please call the roll and establish quorum?
Yes, Councilmember Liang,
Here.
Councilmember Meadows,
Here.
Councilmember Weinberg,
Here.
Vice Mayor Enander,
Here.
Mayor Fliger.
Here.
Thank you. All council members are present.
Thank you. Next, we will have the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and we should have Catherine Zaretzi. Oh, there she is. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining us. And as usual, we ask everybody to go on mute so Catherine can lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. And so we'll turn it over to you, Catherine, and thanks again for being here.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Catherine. Well done. And you are with troop number 61427. Thank you for joining us. What grade are you in?
I'm in 7th grade.
7th grade?
Yes.
Oh, so did you just start middle school or are you in middle school?
I'm in middle school.
Are you enjoying it?
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks again. Well done. Thanks for being here.
Bye.
Bye, Catherine. Okay, next on the agenda, we have report on closed session, and I have nothing to report from our closed session earlier today. And so with that, let's move to changes to the order of the agenda, and I will look for virtual hands from council members. Does anyone have any proposed changes to the order of the agenda? Okay, I see no virtual hands raised. So then let's go on to public comments on items not on the agenda. And so if there are members of public here who are here to speak on an agenda item, then you would wait until we call that item. But if you're here to speak on a non-agenda item, now is your opportunity to do so. Do we have any hands, City Clerk?
Not that I see at the moment.
Okay, we'll
No
keep
hands.
going.
Oh.
We're making up for lost time.
There is one hand. There's one hand.
Oh, we do.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, City Clerk.
Her name is Betty.
Oh, never mind, never mind.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Bet.
Then there's
Okay.
no one else wishing to speak.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to our consent calendar. We have 2 items on our consent calendar. Would any member of council like to remove an item from the consent calendar? Again, I'm looking for virtual hands. Seeing none, let's go to public comment on the consent calendar. City Clerk, do we have any? Councilmember Liang, I see your hand. Do you have a question or would you like to pull an item from the consent calendar?
Yeah, I'd like to pull item 1.
Okay. So item 1 has been pulled by Councilmember Liang. Let's go to public comment.
You can
then-
vote on, I like it pulled because I'd like to vote on separately.
Oh, you're just pulling it for the voting. You don't have a, okay, that's.
Well, I actually do have a comment. Why don't I just pull it? You're right.
Okay, so Councilmember Liang is asking to pull item number 1 from the consent calendar. Let's go to public comment to see if we have any comment from members of the public.
Madam Mayor, I do not see any members of the public with their hand raised.
Thank you. So now we will bring it back for a vote to approve the only remaining item on the consent calendar. So I'm looking for a motion from council members. Councilmember Councilmember Meadows.
All right, I move that we approve the consent calendar, not item number 1, but consisting only of item number 2.
Thank you. We have the motion by Councilmember Meadows, Councilmember Weinberg,
Second,
and a second by Councilmember Weinberg. City Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Sure. Mayor Fliger,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Enander,
yes.
Councilmember Lee Ing,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, City Clerk. And we will move item number 1 to follow item number 6. Okay, so with that, we will move on to our public hearing, which is item number 3. Don't have my gavel, but I will turn it over to Mr. Biggs. And number 3 is on the City of Los Altos Title 14 zoning amendment, the Public Land Protection Ordinance. And Mr. Biggs, I'll turn it over to you and we'll follow our normal hearing process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Fliger, members of the City Council. John Biggs with your Community Development Department. This evening, the City Council is considering an ordinance that, if adopted, would establish a public land protection overlay district. And if this overlay district is applied to specific city-owned properties, that would require a vote of the people of Los Altos in order to sell the property or exchange or transfer title of the property to another entity. Likewise, once the PLP designation is applied, it would take a vote of the people to remove that PLP designation unless the City Council takes and rescinds the ordinance and rescinds the PLP designation applied to a property. Your Planning Commission has reviewed the ordinance. They did this, and their recommendation to the council was that the ordinance not be adopted. Their concerns were that this is not really a permanent protection for city lands, that a future city council by a simple majority vote could repeal the ordinance and repeal the public land preservation overlay applied to the property. That there was no immediate need for a ordinance like this because there was no intent, as far as we know right now, to sell or transfer title of any of the city-owned properties or properties that are in the city's pool. And they just questioned the overall need. They felt that the duly elected city council members should be able to make a decision in the future as to what to do with city properties. So that was their set of recommendations to council. Staff is recommending adoption of the ordinance with a little modification to the language of the ordinance. The modification of the ordinance would be that the ordinance would include language clarifying that a future council by simple majority vote would be able to take and remove the or rescind or repeal the PLP designation or the ordinance itself. So that's staff's recommendation. We are here to answer any questions for you. We do have the draft ordinance that was in your packet. We also provided, in response to some questions, a map to the city council members this week that showed all of the properties that the city owns. And I think there was about 50 of those properties on the list. And they have a variety of zoning designations. For example, the Civic Center site is zone PCF for public and community facilities. Then you're familiar with the parking plazas in the downtown, and there are a couple of zoning designations to those parking plazas. They fall under the CD or commercial downtown zoning designation or the CRS zoning designation, commercial and retail sales. And that's one of the reasons why we felt it was important to develop an ordinance that could be applied broadly and incorporated into the zoning code, because the ordinance itself isn't specific to a specific zone district. It's specific to a property should the city council elect to apply that zoning overlay district to a property at some point in the future. So again, this evening, you're considering this public land protection ordinance overlay district ordinance. You do not have a recommendation as of this evening for a specific parcel to apply it to, but that would come back to the council at some point in the future. We know that there is interest in applying an ordinance like this to our Civic Center site. So with that, I'll conclude my report and answer any questions that the council members might have.
Thank you, Mr. Biggs. Okay, council members, let's start with questions. Councilmember Weinberg, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director Biggs, for your presentation. I just have one question. Could you please walk me through in the ordinance how the ordinance in front of us today is different from the ordinance that the Planning Commission considered back in February?
The ordinance itself is the same. There's no difference between the two. We did, at the Planning Commission hearing, offer to take the ordinance back and possibly amend it to see if we could include some kind of legacy provision, which would make it more difficult, I guess is an appropriate way to phrase it, to remove the ordinance by a future city council. There was some talk about having a supermajority vote of the council impose and then maybe rescind the ordinance. That's 4/5 of the sitting council members. But on the advice of our city attorney, that wasn't a possibility to include in the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm sorry, I actually do have one other question then.
Sure.
Staff's recommendation is to adopt the ordinance with the clarification that it can be removed by a future council. Is staff recommending that this council adopt the ordinance because a prior council said that this is what they wanted? Or is staff's recommendation based on other policy conditions or considerations or something else?
Councilmember Weinberg, staff's recommendation to adopt is based on, we believe we received direction from a previous council to bring this policy forward.
Thank you.
Any more questions, Councilmember Weinberg? No. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. England just answered one of them, but I have to admit that I am now puzzled because my recollection, and I'm going back almost 3 years to when the council in, I think it was November of 2018, adopted an ordinance to put limitations on the disposition of parks and open space, but identified at that time 2 areas where they couldn't cover land given the ordinance they were dealing with. One of which was some isolated parcels that were in our parks, but had been or retained some zoning designations that were inconsistent. And those got corrected in November or December 2019, I think. And the other one was, as Mr. Biggs mentioned a minute ago, Hillview. And my recollection is that the direction from council back in November 2018, as well as moving forward other directions from council prior to this one, as well as this one, was to protect Hillview. And when we understood that we had 2 options for doing that, one was a survey and lot line adjustment that was very expensive, and the other was an ordinance with an overlay. My belief, which is obviously erroneous, was that staff was going to bring something back that only dealt with Hillview. So maybe we can avoid a whole bunch of stuff tonight if we just all agree on what we were really trying to do, because right now I'm confused.
If I can hopefully provide some clarification to that. You're welcome. We did bring forward the draft ordinance. At the time we brought forward the draft ordinance, this would have been November of 2020. We indicated that the ordinance would come first, and then the ordinance would be applied to city-owned parcels on an individual basis. And at that time, we understood that the first parcel the then council wanted to apply this to was the Civic Center site. So maybe it wasn't clear in the communication that we would come first with the ordinance and then come back with just a Civic Center site, because we had no direction on applying the PLP regulations to any other city-owned parcel. So that might have contributed to your understanding of the, the process where we've gotten to date.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Meadows.
Yes, thank you. So a couple questions again about the wording of the ordinance and or the staff report. So in one place it says, or it mentions in a number of places that a vote of the people prior to sale of land cannot be guaranteed by a city council vote. And it's mentioned like that's an important factor. Are you smelling? I'm sorry, there's a really distracting noise. I don't know where that's coming from. Sorry, okay. Yeah, that helps. I think it was you, Mayor, sorry. So a vote of the people prior to sale of the land cannot be guaranteed by a council vote. And is that statement appearing a number of times because you're trying to point out that just adopting the ordinance doesn't do it? One then has to actually put the overlay on, or why is that wording mentioned so many times?
The wording is included in the agenda report because, and rightfully so, the Planning Commission in their review of the ordinance, brought up the fact that a current council can impose this ordinance, but a future council, again by simple majority vote, can repeal the ordinance. So we just wanted to make sure it was clear to all the council members that if you elect to adopt this ordinance or even in the future apply the PLP regulation, the overlay district, that a subsequent council can, again by simple majority vote, repeal the ordinance or the overlay. Doesn't carry the, I guess, the complexities of a vote of the people would.
Okay, and then along those same lines about some of the wording, one of the questions that was asked is, if the overlay ordinance is repealed, then the parcels that were previously put under a PLP designation could have their designations repealed as well. But what does could mean? Does that mean it's not an automatic process and it's a two-step process? What does that mean?
That is my understanding. A future council could take away or repeal the PLP overlay district from our zoning code. And then they would also need to take away that PLP designation that's been applied to a property. And we suspect that they would be doing, if they did that, they would be doing both of those actions at the same meeting or the same time.
Okay, thank you. That was my questions.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember Meadows. Councilmember Lee, Ms. Houston, I see your hand is up. It's no longer up. Councilmember Liang.
So just needed clarification from the city attorney. She was stating that the language cannot be changed so that to have a super majority vote or a unanimous vote. Why is that? Why does it have to only be a simple majority?
Because it's just it's a zoning ordinance, and I don't believe that we can add a super majority vote to that. But if you, I don't believe that would be really a fair process. But if you want me to research it some more, I can. But usually you have a super majority vote when it's provided for by statute, like for an urgency ordinance, or for where it actually says that you need a 4/5 or a 2/3 vote. So.
Okay, so then my next question is, normally we counted Hillview as part of parklands when it's not even designated as parkland. So how is it that we could do that, John or Mr. Biggs? Because then we are more deficient in parkland than we think, because it's not designated as parkland, and why is it counted as such?
That's correct. I would, need to go back into history sometime to figure out why they didn't include portions of the Civic Center or Hillview in the parkland designation, but on our land use map, it's designated as public and institutional, so it doesn't have the same land use designation that our parks in Los Altos have, like um, the Redwood Grove. Those have very specific land use designations, parks or other open space. It was a decision made at the time that the zoning codes and the general plan land use designations were applied.
Okay. I think the city attorney wants to answer me.
I believe that the other requirement there, I think it was because only part of Hillview was listed in the park master plan as well. I think they only considered part of it, and part of it was the Civic Center site, and then part of it was parkland. And I think that was some years ago when the park master plan came through, but that would be another reason why only part of it's counted as park. That's just my recollection.
Thanks, Ms. Houston. Councilmember Liang, go ahead.
Yeah, my next question is, part of this is to ensure that this would have to be, this PLP, if we wanted it to, how would I say? If we wanted to ensure, because right now, how do we ensure equity that everyone that's identified in the parkland is treated equitably and ensure the same park protections and service? We would have to be designating a certain portion of Hillview as a park, correct?
Yes, you'd have to apply if you wanted the restrictions that are offered by the current zoning code that says a city-owned piece of property with a parks or other open space designation requires a vote of the people to sell or transfer title. You would have to have that same land use designation applied to portions of Hillview.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay, I have a few questions myself. So my first question, Mr. Biggs, is what's the process to apply the overlay designation? So hypothetically, if this ordinance were to pass, and then it's a two-step process, at least as to Hillview, are there criteria by which the property would need to meet in order for us to apply the overlay designation? Or is it just a majority vote on council to say, let's put an overlay on this property as well?
It's a majority vote of the city council. We would first take an amendment to the city zoning map to the planning commission for one more recommendation, and then come back to the city council asking the council to approve the amendment to the zoning map to make it clear, for the records and into the future, that this overlay district has been applied to the Civic Center parcel, for example.
Okay. And the wording in the ordinance, and this may be a city attorney question. I understand sale, but can you please explain what you mean by transfer?
Well, it would be a sale or transfer by deed. It would be, and it would exclude leases because we did not want to be over inclusive. So some way it would be a sale or transfer of the property. One thing that we did not want to include were any sort of short or long-term leases or licenses. So it would be a transfer of like a deed transfer. It would be sold or deeded. We wouldn't be able to transfer it by deed. And it may not have been a sale, but we did a transfer by deed, so.
And then on the list of properties that Mr. Biggs provided, and I'm sure this council has seen a few times, when this process started back in fall 2018, there were some city-owned properties that didn't have the park or parkland designation. And so we went through a process of designating those. Hillview was a little bit different because of the different parcels. Would this ordinance apply to those parcels that are designated parkland? And if it doesn't, if this ordinance doesn't, then would the whole concept of prior to sale or transfer of parkland, it would need to go to the voters? Would that apply to the parkland designated city-owned properties?
Well, you're correct. There were some properties when we started looking at those that had the parks or other open space designation that were actually part of existing parks, but for some reason they still retain single family residential zoning land use and zoning. We transferred zoning designations and land use designations for those parcels. This PLP ordinance would not apply to those parcels because they already have that parks or other open space land use designation. And you could, I guess, apply this as well to kind of create a double requirement for them. I don't think that would be worth doing. And then the final part of your question is that, if I understood it correctly, there would be no need to apply this to the, this would be
Mayor, can you mute? You appear to be causing the noise that's causing things to break up. Sorry.
I apologize.
The PLP overlay would apply as directed by council to parcels that the council feels it is appropriate for. And we would take that through the review process, planning commission for a recommendation, and then back to council for adoption of the zoning map amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Biggs. And Councilmember Meadows touched on my last question because I wanted to understand the process. If one council were to adopt this ordinance and a future council were to repeal the ordinance, but there were already designated overlay properties, what would it take for that same council to remove that PLP designation? Is it just another majority vote on council, or once a property has been designated with this overlay district, that would require going to the voters to remove that PLP designation?
As I understand it, it would just be a simple majority vote of the council, because once you have removed this PLP overlay district from the zoning code, you no longer have that protection on the books that says a parcel with this designation requires voter approval. So it would still be a two-step process, the ordinance and removing that PLP designation, just to be clear.
Thanks, Mr. Biggs. Okay, I don't have any more questions at this time. I don't see any other council member with their hands raised. So let's go to public comments. City Clerk, let's give our attendees a couple of minutes to raise their hands.
Okay.
So again, members of the public, this is your opportunity to comment on item number 3. Okay, it looks like the hands have stopped going up. So let's give each speaker, here we go. Let's give each speaker 2 minutes.
Okay. Our first speaker will be Penny Lave.
Hi, Council. I'm calling today to urge you to vote no on the public lands ordinance that's on your agenda tonight. The vote on Measure C represented the will of the people. And why would the council vote to overcome the will of the people? The former councils in Los Altos have not sold property. Past councils have bought property, purchased property. They bought Redwood Grove, they bought Heritage Oaks, they bought Grant School, they bought separate parcels to increase Shout Park. The only property that I can remember in the last 55 years that we've lived here being sold was a piece of land in another city's jurisdiction that was excess property and served us no good. So we actually made money on that. But I hope that you will vote no. It is the council's prerogative. They're elected by the people to to carry out things like this. This is serious business. Selling and buying land is very serious business, and I think it should remain in the hands of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny.
And I lost.
Our next speaker is Teresa, followed by Ann Paulson.
Hi, my name is Teresa and I live in Loyola Corners area. I do serve on the Park and Rec Commission, but I'm not calling as a Park and Rec Commissioner this evening. I am hoping that council will actually take the strongest steps possible to protect Hillview and turn it in and designate it as a park. I'm not even sure that what's being recommended tonight is sufficient. I'm very disappointed that this conversation is still going on. There were promises made in 2018 by the previous council serving at that time that it would be designated as parkland, and I am hoping that you will respect the previous council's wishes and follow that. I would like to let people know that at one point, one of the previous councils had a member who swept his arms out in front of him as he looked out of the council chamber windows and said, all of this could be developed. We could take this all down, put up housing and have offices on the bottom and have housing on the top. I have concerns, grave concerns about other councils coming along later that may want to do something like that with our public lands. I think this should be protected, and I think the voters have a right to protect the land that they perceive as parkland. I appreciate your time, I appreciate your consideration, and I do hope that you will be respectful of your previous council and respect their wishes and designate it as parkland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa.
Our next speaker is Ann Paulson.
Good evening, Mayor Flagger and City Council members. This is Ann Paulson. Now, by all means, I'm in favor of you designating Hillview as parkland, but I urge you to reject this ordinance because it would have no effect. The city attorney made it clear at the Planning Commission meeting that what a 3-2 council can enact, a 3-2 council can repeal. So this has no effect. The city council that wanted to sell or transfer some city property could easily do so. This ordinance wouldn't stop them. Moreover, a city council might have good reason to act quickly to make an advantageous trade of some city property. For example, 999 Fremont. I hope you will follow the Planning Commission's unanimous recommendation and reject this. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Our next speaker is Roberta.
Hi, this is Roberta. Can you hear me?
Yes.
me? Hi. Well, I know that Nisa was the chair of the Parks and Recs and Jonathan was on Parks and Recs. So I know I don't need to tell you how important parkland is to all of us, especially as we grow the population. We do need healthy spaces for outdoor recreation and education. So I know I'm speaking to the choir. I do think that Penny Lane was incorrect because we did sell the property downtown, which was a parking lot where Citrilla now is. So we have sold city-owned land. My big concern is that Hillview Park is not designated as a park in the general plan, and therefore it is not a park. It is not treated equitably. It does not have the protections that other parks have. And, that is the focus. What I think that you got to John Biggs and Jolie Houston are trying to come up with a two-step process. If this process is not accepted, then I think they need to come back and actually survey the land and divide out Hillview Park so that it does count as parkland, and we can use our park and lieu fees for that area as well as other park areas. So I think we do need equity. Thank you, Lynette, for saying that. And, I hope that you will come up with a process. We've trusted you, that you promised us that you would come up with a process, you would address it. It's almost 3 years now. So I think it's time to get serious and, protect Hillview Park and make it a park. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta.
Our next speaker is Jean, followed by Janine Valadez. Jean.
I am a resident of the Hillview area. I am in favor of converting, obviously, the soccer field and the baseball field, which are park type environments, to park designation. And actually any area in Los Altos like that should be designated as park. And we should do everything we can to protect those areas. I remember when there was a Portola Elementary School, which is no longer here. And you can't bring it back, even though we need more schools. We need more park space. We have to protect whatever we have left and preserve it to the most of our abilities. That's all I have.
Thank you, Jane.
Our next speaker is Janine Valadez.
Good evening, Council. My name is Janine Valadez. I'm a park commissioner, but I am speaking as a private resident tonight. While I do not support voter referenda that override the auspices and responsibilities afforded to local government bodies, I will say that the voters already spoke on this issue when they rejected Measure C. With their votes, our residents firmly rejected the idea of neutering our city council and burdening our city with the cost of unneeded and expensive ballot measures. We elect our council members to render decisions about the transfers of city properties. They are elected to be the stewards of our city, so why create a parallel form of government? No one has ever suggested that Hillview Field be sold to a third party. Of course, we should designate it as parkland, and the council can do this. In fact, I suspect underneath this, quote, protection measure is really a strategy by certain segments of our community to repeatedly fund ballot measures to slap overlays of control to prevent the enhancement of our city through zoning changes, mixed uses, and both market rate and affordable housing on sites other than Hillview Field. I suspect that Hillview is just a red herring cloaking an ulterior motive. Let's let our city council do their job. I encourage you, city council, to take your job and own it and not pass this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine.
Our next speaker is Joe Beninato.
Good evening, City Council. It's Joe Beninato, resident of Los Altos for 20 years. I already submitted written comments to you. Hopefully that got through, so I'll be brief. I think this is an attempt to undo the will of the people that we recorded a few years ago with the rejection of Measure C. And I agree with Janine in that this feels like an attempt by those who were pushing for Measure C to try and tie the hands of the council with regards to any situation that comes up. I think the residents of Los Altos would be extremely upset if the council were to ever take parkland and sell it off to be used in any capacity other than as parkland. I think all of you know that. I think it would be highly unlikely for that to happen, but there could be a situation where something that the city owns might be needed in trade or in some other situation. So I hope you will reject this. And you designated your planning commission commissioners to analyze this sort of stuff, and they came back, I believe it was 6-1. There's some ambiguity in the minutes about whether it's 6-0 or 6-1. It appears from the video that it was a 6-1 vote against this resolution, and so I'd encourage you to join the voices of the Planning Commission and reject this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Our next speaker is Jenny.
Yes, hello, Mayor and members of the council. There are several reasons to say no to the adoption of the proposed public land preservation ordinance before you, which have recently been stated. In 2018, voters rejected Measure C. Council adoption of this ordinance invalidates that result, which was not questioned at the time. It was correct. Voters elect council members every 2 years to make decisions for our entire town. I ask that you take that responsibility on this item, as you do every meeting on so many items. Do not pass this on to our community, setting us up for multiple ballot measures to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny.
Madam Mayor, I do not see any other members of the public with their hands raised. Oh, excuse me, I do have one more. South Los Altos resident.
I'm a South Los Altos resident, and I find this discussion myopic from a couple different perspectives. First of all, it seems all focused mostly on what happens, what overlay is given to Hillview. I would like to see an overlay on every city property so that this council and others cannot dispose of the property owned by the residents and voters of the city without their approval. Second, I think it's myopic in terms of whether that property needs to be designated as a park or not. It should apply to any city property. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Mayor, I do not see any more hands.
Thank you, City Clerk. So I'm bringing it back to council for discussion and any follow-up questions. I have a follow-up question for the city attorney, and it has to do with designating Hillview as park. And, it ties in with the question I asked earlier about, what would it require if this ordinance were passed for a council to designate any city-owned property with this overlay designation, and it just requires a majority. And that concerns me when we go back, everybody's pointing to the fall 2018 council, which 4 of the 5 of us were not on. And the only council member, I'm not sure she even supported that direction. And I just think it would be very helpful for this discussion, city attorney, to better understand that for Hillview. and what that process would look like for us to solely designate, because I do think this is an additional step by trying to adopt an overlay district that could then be applied to any city-owned property. When the discussion back in fall 2018, and I know I was there listening, and I'm sure the vice mayor was there as well, was really focused on Hillview, because Hillview at the time could not be designated as a park like Grant Park and like all these other places. And so could you speak to that, please, Ms. Houston?
Well, this ordinance only will allow a public lands protection overlay for certain designated parcels. And if you adopt this, we can come back and we can designate the Civic Center site. This ordinance will not designate Hillview as park. And I can defer to Mr. Biggs about that. But what this will do is it will allow a public lands protection to Hillview. And I don't know all the ins and outs of what happened in 2018, but this will give some protection, but a future council can undo it. So this, if you adopt this, you can come back and apply this overlay to the Civic Center properties, and it will have protection, but it's going to have a protection that it cannot be sold or transferred without a vote of the people, which could always be undone, but it will not designate Hillview as a park. And I will have to defer to Mr. Biggs about that, because I think that's why we ended up going down this public lands protection, because Hillview was not a park. I mean, Mr. Biggs, is that correct?
And before you respond, Mr. Biggs, because I want to make sure the city attorney understands the question. So I understand what you just said. The question is, if we were to pass the PLP ordinance tonight, it's not specific to Hillview. And so the confirmation I'm looking for is a future council, this council could also apply this overlay designation to any other city-owned property. I know the plan is a two-step, we would bring back Hillview, but by passing this ordinance, it allows councils, either this or future councils, to also apply that designation to other city-owned property.
Yes, and it would. And what I understand is the previous council revised the zoning for certain parkland that had underlying residential, and they rezoned it to be public land or parkland, and they put that same language in there. It didn't apply to Hillview because Hillview had a different designation. So this can apply, as I understand it, this can apply to any of the public lands, city-owned lands.
Thanks, Ms. Houston. Mr. Biggs, did you have anything to add?
I just wanted to agree with what City Attorney Houston had said, that this does not apply the parks or other open space general plan land use designation to Hillview. There had been some discussions about applying those designations to the soccer field and the baseball field, but there were just some practical difficulties in doing that, including having to subdivide the land, possibly creating non-conforming situations for some of the existing buildings on the Civic Center site, providing easements and so forth. It became quite a complicated series of steps that the city would have to go through to achieve that.
But let me ask the follow-up question. If council only wanted to designate Hillview in order that it would share the same protection as parks, open space, and the other lands that have that protection, is this the only way to do it? Apart from, so go ahead.
Yeah, yes, apart from adopting this ordinance that's in front of council tonight, yes, right. But I'll have to say that I don't believe that parks or other open space is the appropriate land use designation for the entire Civic Center site.
Okay, last question before I look to my colleagues. Is there a way to do this ordinance so that it solely applies to Hillview?
I believe that we could recraft the ordinance and have it applied just to Hillview. I would defer to the city attorney to confirm that, but I think we could craft something that along those lines, yes.
Yes, I believe we could. We'd have to specifically say this applies to the Civic Center parcel only.
Maybe have some criteria with it to say this is why it is getting this overlay district designation. And that's just a question and a thought. Looking to the panelist list to see if other council members have follow-up questions or would like to start or discussion. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to say that yes, council has sold land. And not only that, we did have at one time a private school that wanted, or a school that wanted to take Hillview as their property for their school expansion. So yes, our park lands have been at risk in the past. Secondly, land that's been sold cannot be repealed. You can't pull that back. So once it's done, it's done. Third and most important to me is that the prior council made a promise that we would protect that the council would protect Hillview in a separate action because it could not be covered for the reasons that Mr. Biggs has cited. And even though that's a different council than the council we're sitting on now, I believe that that council did that in good faith. And I believe that this council, I hope, will similarly act in good faith. There is no subterfuge. There is no red herring. There is no other anything going on here other than trying to fulfill the promise made by a council in November 2018 to offer the park use land on Hillview the same protection as that council felt was important to offer for our other parks. I am also concerned that, and this is I called people after I saw this. This was a surprise to me because I truly did not understand two things that I'm seeing in this ordinance. One, I did not understand that the intention was to make it potentially available to all parcels. I truly did not believe that was the direction we gave or that we were going to see that. And the second thing is that I did not understand that whatever protection we could offer going this alternate path, as opposed to the other one, which I'll come back to, would have so little or would have a lesser protection than what our current ordinance offers to other parks. Nevertheless, for the sake of trying to do what the original council proposed and what I think is still important, I would support having this come back to us as a limited ordinance, limited only to covering the parcels, and I think there are more than one, at Hillview that comprise the Civic Center property, if that is the only practicable way to do this. I understand what Mr. Biggs is saying. If we wanted to take the time, and maybe someday we do, that we do the lot line adjustments, we do the subdivision, we do the carve out, we sweat the problems that may arise because of easements or whatever. Yes, it's a complicated process, but we may want to do that because the progressive loss of local control operating out of Sacramento still offers parkland protection that other public lands do not have. And by making this only a PLP, these parklands will not have the same protections as the other parklands. It's basically a half measure, but it's what we're apparently being offered. And that is what I would support doing this evening.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Meadows.
Well, thank you to staff. I know a lot of work has gone into this. I appreciate that. So, but let me give my impressions. So obviously, as we pointed out, only 4 of us were not on that previous council. I did pay attention to this issue, and I was on Planning Commission when some of the land redesignations came forward. Probably the Vice Mayor was as well, turning some of those residential parcels into what we needed them to be. I too understood this to be focused on Hillview, its green space, as a gap that wasn't captured in the park measures that were put in place before. So I must admit to be being surprised as well when I saw this. So let me just go through a list of items I made notes about. So one, a city council selling land looks a lot different now than it used to. So first of all, I don't believe any of us want to sell any part of the Civic Center, but we now are encumbered by the Surplus Land Act. So really the sale of any city-owned property in most cases, and we don't need to get into the details, and I'm certainly not the one to do it because I'm no expert, but requires us notifying public agencies that this is available. Essentially, the whole sale of the land is no longer in city control, and then that process itself is looked over by Housing and Community Development, the state's HCD, and so any land that we are going to sell in the future, which I would argue probably isn't going to be any, is really out of our control. We would just throw it up in the air and, well, whoever comes in and bids and makes the best offer. It would not be something that any smart council would probably want to do short of true desperation. And we don't even want to. So I don't think that's a realistic perspective to think that we're going to be selling land. But then as far as Hillview is concerned, specifically, this ordinance, if it were passed and putting a PLP on top of it, still does not make that parkland. It protects the Civic Center as a, public lands protection, but it still does not turn that in parkland. The subdivision approach that some people had talked about, or doing the surveys and measuring, is attractive. We could potentially identify what is in parkland, but it's also limiting, because if you want to think creatively about what we could do with our Civic Center land, what I think we really want to do is guarantee that we actually maintain at least X% of green space at the Civic Center. I don't know what percent we're at now, but let's just say 25%, just for the sake of this conversation, that we want our Civic Center at minimum to have 20%, 25% green space, but not say it has to be where the soccer field is now and it has to be where the baseball field is now, because what if the police station moved away? And what if we wanted to reconfigure? What we're really trying to do is say we value green space on our Civic Center property, and we want to make sure it's at the level it currently is or greater. So subdividing will actually take away that option. I think has been stated before by some of the speakers and some of the council members, the residents already voted against Measure C, which actually looks much less. This is really much more overbearing than Measure C was. So I would respect the residents' vote against Measure C as indicative of how they potentially feel about that. But basically, we are all committed to protecting our lands. We shouldn't take sort of a huge measure like this is. The Planning Commission recommended against it for a reason. They also talked about Measure C, which I think Mr. Biggs didn't mention in his summary. So I respect their identifying this as being an overhanded approach. What we want to do is preserve our green space on our Civic Center campus, and we can think about ways to do that, but this is not, in my opinion, a way to do that.
Thank you, Councilmember Meadows. Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor. There are a lot of thank yous to go around here as part of my opening remarks. Thank you very much to staff for having spent, I think, an enormous amount of time trying to figure out how to accomplish what they were directed to do by council back in 2018. Between staff, the city attorney, I think it's clear that a lot of effort went into this. I also want to thank all the members of the community that have let council know over the past week, what are your feelings? What are your thoughts? There have been some very brief notes. There have been some very thorough notes on both sides of the issue. They're thoughtful, and I found them extremely useful. Measure C was, in my opinion, the most divisive issue that the city of Los Altos has faced in a very long time. Regardless of where you stood on the issue of Measure C, I think if you were following it closely, or if you were involved in the campaign for it or against it, you probably felt that there was a lot of bad feelings generated by the behavior of this side or that side, and things that were said, and invective and hyperbole. And again, I'm not trying to say one side engaged in it, another side did not. I'm saying that people on both sides of the issue felt that. And because of that, it was a very emotional issue. And I think it's still very emotional. We're seeing that now. A lot of the same people that were very involved in Measure C in 2018 are now coming before the council today. I went back and took a look at the council meeting in 2018. And one of the first things that strikes me is nowhere did I hear that council make a promise. And I'm really concerned by that, because I'm hearing a lot of people say that there was a promise made. I don't believe that this council is bound by a promise made by a prior council, but I think that it is in the best interest of Los Altos. It is good policy for current councils, for current legislative bodies, to take note of obligations that were made by prior iterations of them. It is important. And if this council makes a promise, I want to be able to look to future councils and know that they're going to give that promise great deference. And even if they're not bound by it, they will at least try to understand what was going on and why they made that promise. I did not hear a promise at the 2018 council meeting. If someone can point to me where it was, and I know that can't happen tonight, it's not fair for me to ask someone, show me where on the tape a promise was made. And it's possible that some people are considering language a promise that other people would not. But this is a big issue to me. And I did not see a promise. I did not hear a promise made. Even if there had been a promise made, that was before the voters voted on Measure C. And even though the prior council, for the sake of argument, made this promise, the voters had their say. And I'm having a very difficult time justifying why we would go against the will of the voters. Right? So often we as members of the city council have to make a decision. And the one question that I know is always on the top of my mind, and I firmly believe is on the top of every other member's mind, is what is in the best interest of Los Altos? That is always the question that we are asking when we are asked to make a decision. And we don't always agree, so we're not always going to have unanimous votes. It's very rare that we have an issue where we can look back and say, well, the voters actually gave us our instructions. They told us what they wanted. The voters told us that they did not want what is now being presented to us as an overlay. If you look at the operative language of the resolution that's before us, it all has to do with voter approval. You need voter approval for this. What is voter approval defined as? That this really is Measure C. And Measure C has come back to us. I think that Councilmember Meadows made a very important point, which is even if a very limited version of this proposed ordinance came back to us that would only apply to the soccer field or the baseball field, it still would not make those parts of Hillview parkland. This overlay does not create parkland. It does not rezone. It does not recategorize. For those reasons, I'm not able to support it, and I will not support a limited version of it coming back to us. Also, it does not make sense to me that we would advocate for a protection that is not really a protection. Everyone knows that if a council wanted to sell property, they could then remove the overlay. They could withdraw the entire ordinance. I don't understand what this overlay is really intended to give the city. I don't know what I don't know what it's trying to do. I think I heard someone say, well, at least it's one more step a council would have to take. And maybe it would, but councils, if they want to move fast, they could take multiple steps at once. If a council ever wanted to sell public land, parkland or any other, it would come before a regular meeting. I mean, the voters would have their say in the form of being able to lobby the council. That's not going to change, nor should it change. I personally do not believe that any part of Hillview is in any danger. I don't think that the council is going to sell any of that land. And even if the council wanted to do that, I don't think that this overlay would protect the land. So for all of those reasons, I am not a supporter of the ordinance. One more thank you that I omitted was to the Planning Commission. I listened to the Planning Commission's meeting back in February. There were some very thoughtful questions. There was some very good analysis that helped me a lot. Above all else, I want to thank the Planning Commission for having the courage of acknowledging what they thought a prior council wanted them to do, but being independent and giving us their independent thoughts. The Planning Commission, like every other commission, is not going to be determinative of how I'm going to vote on an issue, but knowing that there are independent people thoroughly looking at issues and giving us their best opinion, not based on what they think council wants to hear, but based upon how they really analyze an issue is so important. It's what makes the commissions valuable. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. Councilmember Lee Eng, we haven't heard from you.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to make a statement. One of council's priorities is to protect and expand green space. Before us today is staff's attempt to help us do that. I think it's important that there are some protections of our public land. Vice Mayor very well articulated about the sale of public land and what she let and the interest of always having to defend our public lands against other organizations who may be interested in our lands. We've also given away public land. So for $1. So I think having this PLP is a temporary measure. And I think we can take a temporary measure until we take the additional steps to protect our public land. What I stated earlier was making sure that our lands are being protected equitably. And I don't want to, and I think that is our goal. Like you said, everyone wants to ensure protections of our land. If we do nothing, we're just giving words and not really doing anything to do so. So I would put forward a motion that we adopt the PLP ordinance with the changes that I think was raised by the Planning Commission, that they were concerned that a simple majority, but I think it should be a minimum of a supermajority or unanimous decision that could make any changes to it. So I would make those changes and have that edited to this PLP, and then we can provide direction to staff to subdivide or provide a new map so we can provide clear protections on our community center and our open space areas. So that said, that's my motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Lee Eng. Is there a second?
For purposes of discussion, Mayor, I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Lee Ang, seconded by the Vice Mayor. Any discussion before we go to a vote?
I have a clarifying question. Sorry. Mr. Weinberg.
Councilmember Weinberg.
I may be asking the same question as the Vice Mayor. I just want to make sure I understand the motion. As I understand it, it's a two-part motion. The motion is to pass the proposed ordinance, but require either a supermajority or unanimous consent, and to subdivide the Hillview parcel, presumably so the ball field and the soccer field are carved out?
The ball field, the soccer field, and the new community center property, as well as where the parking lot, the Neutra house.
Okay, as I understand the motion, I can't support it for the reasons that I previously said.
Vice Mayor.
A question for the maker of the motion. When you say to include Neutra House, that's technically not part of the community center parcel, to my understanding. And do you intend in this motion to cover the entire community center, meaning from San Antonio, the parking lot, City Hall, Lacey, the police department, the orchard, the property where the museum is, and the new community center, or are you talking about asking that this come back and apply only to some certain parts?
Correct. That's the second half that you just mentioned.
So so I'm not clear on which parts of the overall, what we generally would consider the City Hall and Community Center area.
That would have the PLP. That would have the PLP, and then the whole thing would have the PLP.
What would have the PLP?
Well, the PLP as it is written, but just the change in that it needs supermajority and majority, or majority, whichever one, since you're seconding and you're willing to accept, then I would provide direction to have it come back for further discussion to see how we would subdivide it. So then we could have protections provided over our parkland properties, as well as the community center area and the properties under Neutra and the Neutra house. So we can have that. I'm not going to be specific, so I can have that discussion come back to us.
I'm sorry, do you want it to come back as something to be covered under the PLP if we pass the ordinance?
If we pass
the ordinance, or you want it to come back and do some other kind of protection?
To come back and do some other kind of protection, similar like we did on Grant Park. So you'd have to create the.
Okay, so I'm not sure that, and this would be a question for the city attorney, I'm not sure that the second thing can be covered as a motion under this agenda item. I'd ask the city attorney about that. But my last question, I hope, would be, do you then, if we were to pass this ordinance, are you asking that staff come back in the meantime with a proposal to cover some part or all of the community center and the whole campus, or just the two ball fields, or nothing? Do you want that's what has been described tonight as the necessary second step?
So to come back to provide the, clarify your second half now.
So are you asking that the staff then bring back a PLP application to part of the civic community center and civic center area?
Well, if we pass it,
otherwise, what's the point in passing this ordinance?
Well, this whole thing applies to everything that's stated.
It doesn't apply to anything until we take a separate action on a specific parcel.
Okay, then bring the whole civic center back. And then from there, we can direct them to recreate a map similar to what we did at Grant Park so we can have.
So what I think, Mayor, may I restate what I think the.
Do so that we know what we're voting on.
Okay. So I believe the motion is to adopt this ordinance with a change to require a 4/5 vote of council, where it currently says majority vote, and to direct staff to come back with assuming that this passes, to come back with a separate action to apply the PLP to the entire Civic Center, Community Center, Hillview set of parcels. Is that?
And the only thing is, it's up to you whether you want to do supermajority or unanimous.
I believe the city attorney will tell us we can't do a unanimous. So
okay,
I'm not even sure we can do a supermajority. There seemed to be some question about that.
Okay, so we have the motion. Is it by Councilmember Lee-Eng or the Vice Mayor? Who is the maker of the motion?
I am.
Okay, so motion by Councilmember Lee-Eng, seconded by the Vice Mayor. City Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Sure. Councilmember Meadows,
No.
Councilmember Weinberg,
No.
Mayor Fliger,
No.
Vice Mayor Neander,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee-Eng.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion fails 3-2.
Okay, thank you. So what I would like to propose, and City Attorney, let me know if this requires a motion, but I would like to give direction to the City Attorney and staff to work on either an ordinance or whatever it would take to designate the Civic Center as parkland, open space, or is there a way to narrow the application of the overlay district so that it solely applies to Hillview and precludes a council from using that designation for other city-owned property? You know, going back to what Councilmember Weinberg said about whether or not a promise was made, my recollection, and I know it's the recollection of many people, that the discussion really focused on Hillview and what we needed to do in order to bring the same protection to Hillview. And so, you know, even for residents who believe that, you know, there was a promise made, you know, it would be a stretch for them to say any promise extended beyond Hillview. And so I would support something coming back to us that's solely focused on Hillview, and what that looked like, you know, what the process would look like in order for us to give the Civic Center that kind of protection. And I will touch on the Measure C. No one wants next year to be a Measure D. And so I think it's important for us to figure out something that reflects the sentiment and the votes of residents, and also, you know, what I know the direction was from the council in fall 2018, which I think has been twisted in many ways by many people. So I'm going to look to staff before I make a motion, or look to one of my colleagues if one or two are so inclined to make a motion if we need to make a motion. But before we give direction or make a motion, I want to look to staff to make sure what we're asking is clear.
So Mayor, what you're asking is clear, and if 3 members of council agree with that, we'll take the direction. We wouldn't need a motion. We'll do the research. I want to clarify, we would be creating an overlay zoning district, not a parcel overlay, meaning that we can create the conditions under which the district can be applied tightly. But I think if any other properties met those conditions, they would also be eligible. So what I'm saying is we can try and cater it tightly to Hillview, but we may come back that other properties, if they met the same conditions, would also be eligible. So we'll focus on Hillview, and we'll follow what the state law says around that. And I don't know what we'll find, but I believe with an overlay district, it's the conditions that council wants to apply to put the district in play.
And I'll support that, Mayor.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. I see the city attorney. And go ahead, city attorney, then I'll go to Councilmember Weinberg.
And Mr. Biggs can add to this, but it's going to just be a public land overlay because the way that the Hillview and the Civic Center is designated in the general plan. So this ordinance cannot amend the general plan. Is that correct, Mr. Biggs? Isn't that why it didn't get swept into the park land changes earlier on, is because Hillview isn't all park. It's park and public. It's kind of, and that's the whole subdivision issue. And we've got pieces of park, pieces of public land. So doing the overlay would protect all of it. But we can work on something. But this isn't going to be a parkland preservation overlay. It's going to be a public land overlay. And we would put in that language that was recommended in the staff report that it could always be reversed by a future council.
And as the city manager noted, we would include in the ordinance specific measures to, specific to the Civic Center complex, but as he noted as well, it could catch other parcels in that net, so.
No, I think they only wanted to come back just for the Civic Center.
That's true, but I think the point made was that depending on how we craft it, it could potentially apply to other parcels as well.
And can I just follow up on something the city attorney said? Because I know we've had this discussion before and why we ended up looking at an overlay option. I think it'd be helpful for council to better understand again why looking at each parcel and going through that exercise is not the advisable path, since that gives it more protection than an overlay. And I remember that meeting where city attorney explained why she was recommending the overlay, but it's been 2 years. And I wonder if we had started that exercise, maybe we would have had it by now. So if it's just a timing thing, I think it would be very helpful for us to understand. Or is it something that's not so much, like, there's no way for us to do the subdivision and look at all the parcels and pull it all together to have that open space park designation. So I think that would be helpful for us to better understand why, again, we're recommending the overlay district option versus going through the exercise of looking at each parcel and then trying to pull it together and designate it all open space and parks.
So Mayor, to respond to that, if council's policy direction is to give Hillview park protection, then we would actually want to go through the exercise that you're referencing, even though it takes time and it's costly. That's really, if we want it to be a park, then we'd have to go through that the process. I think the reason we keep seeing an overlay come back is because it is complex and difficult, and as Mr. Biggs stated, there's a lot to unpack and unwind. So I think there's some thought that the overlay would provide adequate protection, but it wouldn't be park protection. So really, I think if the direction from council is to come back with a tightly defined overlay district with the hope that it can only apply to a specific piece of land, we can work on that. If council would prefer, we can come back with the more time-consuming, expensive process to subdivide it out. But I do think your point was a good one if we've been working on it for quite a while.
So it's two different directions. One is to definitely come back with the overlay that's very limited and restricted to Civic Center. But I'm also interested to hear the process again, and we don't have to do it tonight, but when you bring back the PLP, the process to actually do that full open space park designation and what that entails, because even with the PLP ordinance, at least it gives some temporary protection. We could also direct staff, once we better understand the process, start that process now. We have the PLP in place for the Civic Center, but start that process now, depending on what you come back and what that process looks like and everything else.
Okay, that's perfect, Mayor. We've got it.
So I want to make sure I have at least two council members supporting me on this, but I see Councilmember Weinberg with his hand raised and then Councilmember Liang. So Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Can we pause for a second and rethink about the direction we want to send staff in? specifically with respect to the overlay. I personally do not believe that Hillview is in any danger of being sold, transferred, or otherwise having its title somehow changed by this council or any council in the foreseeable future. I also don't believe that what the vice mayor referred to as the progressive policies of Sacramento really do pose a threat, but I acknowledge that maybe they do. And if they do, having an overlay is not going to protect those parcels. Redesignating it as parkland or something else would protect it from that kind of an intrusion. So rather than going down the path of an overlay, which will not protect us from, again, something I don't think is really a big concern, but I will acknowledge could be, I think that would be a much better use of staff's time and resources, as opposed to them coming back with something which is essentially the same but limited in geographic scope. So we would still be applying this overlay that could be withdrawn by a future council. It feels to me like we're spinning our wheels. I think that it's still contrary to the spirit of Measure C, and it's not going to provide the protection that I believe the council is trying to give to Hillview. It just doesn't make sense to me go down that road. And I understand that subdividing Hillview in and of itself is an extraordinarily complex process. I get that. It's unfortunate, but I get that. I wonder if there's some other alternative that we can ask staff to look for, to engage in, because coming back with another overlay that's going to have the same problems as the one that we're looking at today doesn't feel to me like it's a real good use of staff's time.
Thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. Councilmember Lee Ang.
Hi, Mayor. Thank you. I do want to be the third council member to support the direction you gave. The one thing I am concerned about is, while this is one, it is temporary, like we said, until we do better protections. And if we do this overlay, it still goes to the vote of the people if they wanted to transfer or sell it, correct, City Attorney? Because we don't do I just have to say, we really need to do a good job in really informing our residents. And that's why I like the idea of if it had to go to the vote of the people, because if you did that, it's an attempt to really do our best to inform the public. The other thing is, if we were to do some better protections, like as the next measure, the next step to ensure that our public lands are protected, you see that other cities have concerns. Menlo Park is putting on an ordinance to introduce measures to protect their public lands. You see that San Jose is now looking at putting small houses on public lands. So I think that is why it is important that we do something to protect our open space and parkland. We have the least amount of parkland per capita in our, compared to other cities. And we need to do our best to try to protect it. There's no doubt about it. I mean, as former park commissioners, you know, our master plan is about protecting our public open space and parkland. So, you know, I think it's important for us to take the next step as mentioned by the city manager to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee Ang. So staff, you have 3 council members supporting the direction. Councilmember Meadows, we didn't hear from you. I don't know if you want to weigh in here.
No, I've got nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Meadows. So any other city attorney, go ahead.
Yes, and again, I want to make sure, and in response to Councilmember Lee Ng's comments, this overlay, even at covering just the Hillview, it's not going to convert Hillview into a park. It will just put a protection on it. And that protection, if in the future, if the ordinance is passed, in the future, the council would have the option of repealing that zoning and doing what it wants to the land, or at that time, it could put it to a vote of the people. And that might be at a general election or a special election. And that would be a time-consuming and costly process. But this does not guarantee that it cannot, that zoning cannot be repealed. This is not like a Measure C. This is not like an initiative. So I want council and public to know that this is a zoning protection, but it's not the same as a voter initiated protection. So I've been very clear all along about this. And so I just want to make sure.
City Attorney, you have been very clear. The residents of Los Altos have already rejected the voter initiative. So I think we're all clear on that. I'm going to close this item. We've been on it for a while. And so staff is clear on the direction. And so with that, we will move on.
A clarifying question on the direction as well. The other part that the city manager mentioned. So just to make sure that was part of the direction.
Yes, City Manager, are you clear on the direction?
We're clear on the direction, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. And I'll just echo all the thanks that were expressed earlier, staff, planning commissioners, residents. Thanks for your participation and all the work that went and time that went into this. Okay, so it's 8:36. I think we can do item number 4, which is our first discussion item. And I see Mr. Maginot has turned on his video. Deputy City Manager Maginot, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. I don't have a formal presentation for you on this item, but I did just want to provide a brief introduction and then get straight into council questions and move from there. As the council knows, in March, President Biden signed into law the American Rescue Plan Act, which I will refer to in this my comments as ARPA. You may have heard it as ARPA or ARP or whatnot, but I will refer to it as ARPA. ARPA set aside dedicated funds for each city in the country, of which Los Altos is one of those. Our portion was approximately $7.2 million that would be paid to the city in 2 tranches or 2 installments, 2 payments, if you like. As Los Altos is considered a non-entitlement city, our disbursements were to be made through the state. As such, there was some delay in us getting our funds compared to entitlement cities, but we did receive the first payment of $3,598,964 in mid-July, and we'll receive the second payment of an equal amount in July 2022. Now, ARPA does outline some of the permitted uses and non-permitted uses of the funds. As described in the staff report, one of the uses is to make up for revenues which were lost due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the federal government provided a formula which can be challenging to read unless you are a math person. Fortunately, we had the assistance of Barry Foster from HDL, who is on the call with us tonight, who helped us in our calculations and also helped us with some other aspects related to receiving the funding and getting ourselves ready for ARPA. Now, as indicated in the staff report, the city's estimated loss in revenue far exceeds what the city is actually getting. And as such, staff is recommending that we accept the full amount of ARPA funding into the general fund as as replacement of some of that lost revenue. With that, as I mentioned, Barry Foster is here. He and I can hopefully answer any questions which the council has. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Maginot. How lucky are you to be able to tell a council that you have $3.5 million for us?
That's what I've been working as acting finance director for the last few months, was for this moment.
All thanks to you. So I want to make sure I understand what the ask is tonight, Mr. Maginot. It's really for us to approve moving this amount into the general fund. The discussion tonight is not about how we want to use these funds. Is that correct? You're just looking for approval for us, for the reasons you have stated, to move this to our general fund. Is that correct?
Correct. And the budget that the council adopted in June did include transferring the funds into the general fund, but then did include a transfer of a portion of the funds out. And so what we're saying is we're not going to transfer those funds out. And then as we get into the mid-year process and moving forward and seeing where we're at, if there are programs that the council wishes to explore, we recommend then using general funds to do that, as that will provide us with a lot more flexibility moving forward.
And when, just so I understand the timeline and for anybody listening, when will you bring that discussion back to us for us to then discuss and determine where, if anywhere, we want to allocate some of those funds?
Sure. Well, of course, the council can request an agenda item at any time to discuss any programs that you may have. I mentioned specifically the mid-year budget, which unsurprisingly happens around the middle of the year, which for the city of Los Altos is around December, January timeframe. Of course, as the council is aware, we have a new finance director as of yesterday. And so I don't want to make any promises for him, but it would be towards the December, January, early February timeframe for the mid-year discussion. But as I say, the council, of course, can schedule a discussion on any programs or expenditures that you would like before then.
Okay, so and just a follow up to that, because I may request that and I don't know if there's support for that. Is there a length of time that you would prefer to give staff an opportunity to really look at the funds before we agendize how we want to spend it? Or you could be ready for that discussion in a month?
That is a very good question. And I see the city manager is coming on, so I don't promise anything that he is not satisfied with.
Mayor, we could be ready to go in a month based on the topics that council would like us to research. Instead of doing them as one-off, it may be easier to do them as part of the normal budget process. But if there is something that's pressing, we are certainly happy to research that and bring it back.
Thank you. And those are my questions. I'm going to look to my colleagues to see if they have any questions. Again, the focus is just for us to approve transferring the full amount or keeping it in the general fund. Vice Mayor.
So I will support this, obviously, with great enthusiasm and appreciation for all of the work of Mr. Maginot and everyone else that has worked on this in the last year. But I would echo the mayor's request that we get some information, if not in 1 month, then certainly by the end of October, if we can, or 1st of November, on where we think we are and what we think we might need to move around. I know I've expressed this privately to the city manager, that I really don't want to wait until December for an update on where we stand. But with all due respect to Mr. Furtado, who spent his first day on the job attending a finance commission meeting in the evening. So his first day, he earned his pay.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. There was no question there because remember, this is just questions. We still have to go to public comment. So if no questions, let's go to public comment, City Clerk.
I see only one hand at the moment, and that is Roberta.
So let's give Roberta 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Roberta.
Hi, well, this obviously is good news. I'm wondering if Mr. Maginot, he said our losses far exceeded what we were taking in. So could he put a number on that so we have some idea?
Thanks, Roberta. I don't see any other hands raised, and so let's bring it back. And Mr. Maginot, if you're in a position to respond, I can have you do so. If not, to the speaker, the public speaker's question.
Sure, and I'm calling up the staff report so I can share my screen as it is in there. And if there's any questions as to how we came up with this number, I felt like I explained it in the staff report, but as I say, Barry Foster, who understands the math better than I do, is on. As indicated in the staff report, for the period ending in December 31 of 2021, so December of this year, and that's measuring from December of last year. The amount is about 6,111,000. The following year it's about 6.5 million, and then 6.9 million. So doing the math, oh, and then of course for the December 31, 2020, it was about 5.7 million. Oh gosh, you're gonna ask me to do math really quickly, huh?
John, can I jump in for just a second?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so Council, my name is Barry Foster. I'm a principal with HGL Companies. And so we were retained to help with ARPA. And we also do your sales tax for the city too. We've done it for a lot of years, and property tax. And so the one revenue stream that is identified in terms of a loss is for calendar year 2020. So as John said earlier, that's a little over $5.7 million. So you have that loss that's known. And then you can also go out and you can project out for 21, 22, and 23. Those are estimates. We'll have to wait till the actual revenue comes in to show that, but you have pretty significant revenue loss just this year. So you've got the ability to move that money into the general fund. As John said, it gives you the kind of that maximum flexibility to still, you can do any kind of general government services with that. And so you can do recovery efforts or whatever you wanted to do, or just anything that would be general government services. So you've got that revenue loss pretty significant just for this year. So that takes care of your first allocation. And then next July, you'll get your second and your last allocation.
And doing some quick math, it was about 25 million over a 4-year period.
Thank you, Mr. Maginot. Okay, so council members, I'm ready to take a motion. If there are no more questions for staff, as Mr. Maginot has explained, it's a very straightforward question he has for us. So I can look to my colleagues for a motion. Okay, Councilmember Weinberg.
I move that staff allocate all of the ARPA funds to the general fund.
Is that sufficient, Mr. Maginot?
Can I ask that you add on the phrase at the very end as replacement for lost revenue?
So added.
Thank you.
So motion by Councilmember Weinberg, Councilmember Meadows.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Meadows. City Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Liang,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Enander,
Yes.
Councilmember Weinberg,
Yes.
and Mayor Fliger.
Yes.
Thank you. And the motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
And thank you, Madam Mayor and the council. And again, I want to say again, thank you to Barry Foster. We only heard from him for a very short period of time, but that does not reflect the amount of effort and help and work that he did to help us understand and process the ARPA funding. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Maginot, and thanks, Mr. Foster. Okay, so it's 8:50, and I'm going to look to staff to see if they can do their presentation in 10 minutes, and then we will take our 9 p.m. break. Or would you prefer for us to take the break now? So can you make your presentation in 10 or less minutes?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, so then I will introduce item number 5, which is extending the off-leash pilot program at the Hillview baseball field, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of City Council. Good evening. My name is Manny Hernandez, Maintenance Services Director for the city. I'll start with the item in front of you tonight. For your consideration is Resolution 2021-50 that would allow for a limited extension of the current off-leash dog pilot program at Hillview baseball field. On February 23rd, 2021, Ordinance 2021-475 that was able to suspend Municipal Code Section 508010 to allow dog owners to have their dogs off leash at Hillview Park baseball field. And this ordinance would allow, for a 6-month pilot program for off-leash dogs at the Hillview baseball field for designated hours. And those are currently happening right now. The pilot program commenced on April 1st, 2021. The 6-month off-leash pilot program, along with Ordinance 2021-475, will sunset on Tuesday, September 28th, 2021. With the pilot program ending shortly, staff and the PAR Parks and Recreation Commission subcommittee that's working on this has started preparing the data and the feedback created during this pilot program. To measure the success of the program in accordance with council direction, the following sources will be providing this information. We're using these following sources: Los Altos Police Department, Animal Control, City Website Survey, the Recreation and Maintenance staff, Off-Leash Pilot Program Subcommittee, and other public correspondence. The Parks and Recreation Commission is scheduled to review the pilot program information and possibly prepare a recommendation for council at its October 13th meeting that's coming up. When approving the pilot program, council directed staff to return back to them with this information no later than 60 days after the conclusion of the initial 6-month pilot. That would have the information coming back to City Council no later than November 30th, 2021 meeting. So the policy question for consideration is council's adoption of Resolution 2021-50, authorizing the extension of the off-leash program at Hillview baseball field until City Council receives the recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Commission and takes further action at that time. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Maybe we can start questions. So let me see if there are council members with questions. And I know we heard from some members of the public, so I want to clarify, Mr. Hernandez, what's before us this evening isn't a request for us to make this pilot program permanent, because we still need to get this assessment and information from commission and staff. So really, the question before us is to extend it to allow that to happen. Extend the time for the pilot program to allow you to finish the fact and information gathering and to bring that back to council. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you, Mayor, for bringing that up. Yes, this is just a limited extension, so this program can continue on while that information is being dissected and brought before council at that time. The one thing that I will mention, if it isn't brought to council before November 14th, we still have a maintenance plan shutdown of our fields for the winter season come November 14th. So the fields will close at that point anyway. So I would put that as probably the date if it doesn't get to council before then for review.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you. Council members, any questions for Mr. Hernandez? Okay, don't see any hands raised. So I will go to public comment. We may be able to do this before 9. So there are 4 hands raised. So let's take a 7-minute break, members of the public. We normally break at 7, but I'm going to take the break a little bit earlier, and we'll come up and we'll start with comments from the public. So let's take a 7-minute break. We will come back at 9:01 p.m. Thank you. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so welcome back. We will resume our meeting at 9:02 p.m. and we'll pick up where we left off, which is going to public comment on item number 5. And so City Clerk, let's give each speaker 2 minutes.
Okay, the first speaker I have is identified by a telephone number, the last 4 digits, 77989.
Yes, hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Oops. Hello? Hello?
Yes, hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. My name is Vic and I live near the park. I've been here about 28 years or so. I just want to give you a feedback on this park, the way unleash hours are working. It may be in just a pilot program, but this is really very unusual to see. This is all-day activity. Dogs are not monitored. People are bringing it all day. They are loose. I've been personally attacked 3 times. I've called police. Police doesn't show up. People don't really respect off-leash hours. People don't seem to read the signs. Park is really almost, the grass is destroyed. People in the evening, the dogs are fighting. Dogs are barking all the time. My driveway has been blocked several times. There seems to be nobody monitoring the violations. And there is no response from police when I've called 3 times. People are gathered by the sidewalk, drinking socially, having fun. This is good for the people who own the dogs, but the people who are using the park for, and for their purpose, it's not available to them. People are also coming on the bikes, on the rollers with the dogs, running with them. So we have to now watch who is using and who's not using the sidewalk. And there's a high-speed bikes coming on and off to the sidewalks all the time. My recommendation is not to continue this park as a dog unleashed park. And council should consider that. And if you, for some reason, still think this is a viable solution, it should be completely fenced in a corner from the entrance from the community center. People are even walking the dogs off leash from the street. So it has become that unsafe. Dogs are urinating in the park. It's already unsanitary.
Thank you. Your time is up, but thank you so much for your comments. Thank you. And as a reminder, what we're doing tonight, we are considering extending the time to allow staff to work with the commission and of course get feedback like what you're providing tonight to bring it back to council for us to determine whether or not we continue the program and or if we need to make any modifications. City Clerk, who is next?
Our next speaker is Wes, followed by Lisa Deegan.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council and staff. I would like to say that I am strongly in favor of a gathering place for dogs and their human companions. I would like to say I'm strongly opposed to any such area that is not fully enclosed by a fence. A fence will minimize, if not eliminate, many of the issues that the previous speaker just brought up, and also will allow, with neighborhood acceptance, for longer hours. So enforcement might be a bit easier to do. I was going to say quite a bit more, except you have received public correspondence that is on record now that touches upon many, if not all of the points I was going to bring up and does so much more eloquently and completely than I might have. So I do refer you all to the public correspondence that was received in written form. As the trial program will not include a fence in it if extended for another couple months, I am strongly not in favor of an extension. I believe you have received all of the feedback you need to make a decision. And I don't think carrying on for an extended period of time will give you any more data than you have not already received and might in fact open up additional unfortunate incidents such as the previous speaker mentioned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Wes.
Our next speaker is Lisa Deegan.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good evening, Madam Mayor and honorable council members. I am Lisa Deegan, 17-year resident of Los Altos. I live right around the corner from Hillview. I'm here to speak on behalf of 286 Los Altos residents local to the Hillview area who support the off-leash dog park pilot program. We want you to know how transformative the program has been for our community. We have an amazing success story where there's a new sense of community that has developed. Everyday neighbors come out to exercise, socialize their dogs, and also catch up with new and old friends in our community. It has changed this neighborhood for the better, more than any of us expected. We just want you to know what a unique and valuable gem that you've created here, and we are so thankful for it. It's much more than a dog park. It's a community gathering spot where we share resources, stories, build friendships, and more. Our very diverse group, in addition to socializing our dogs, have celebrated the birth of multiple babies, one marriage, mourned the death of dogs, also family members due to COVID, other illnesses. We gained employment because of members of the group, provided care for other dogs during family emergencies, created a dog calendar, donated to an animal shelter, socialized outside the dog park, and so much more. Let me tell you my story. I'm just one of many who have stories to share. I am a first-time dog owner. I got my dog 3 days before my younger brother passed away from ALS. He was only 47. So this was bad timing, but it was good timing. I was clueless on being a dog owner, but through this group, I learned so much about being a dog owner and was able to socialize my puppy. So we asked two things. First, please vote to extend the pilot during the review period. And secondly, how can we as residents work best with city to help improve the Hillview field experience for both us and other users? We all live here. We feel a sense of ownership on the field. We want to take care of it.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Teresa, followed by Jean.
Good evening. This is Teresa Morris. I am on the Park and Rec Commission, and I am not calling this evening as a Park and Rec Commissioner, though, and I'm on the subcommittee. I will reserve any comments or information that I have regarding the pilot program for the time when we present our findings to the City Council on in November. What I would ask, though, as just a standard resident, is that we have a hard stop to the pilot program extension, and that if it could be, as Mr. Hernandez suggested, the time when the field closes, that would be greatly appreciated. And if we could also have the surveys have a stop time, but then have a restart time for the residents to be able to have a place to voice their opinions about the dog park pilot program, and just it's psychologically helpful for people to be able to have a space where they can go and communicate their feelings about something. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
Our next speaker is Jean.
Thank you, Council, for having me. I am the one neighbor that pretty much lives at Hillview. I am in left field. I am facing the park every day. I've lived here my whole life, 25 years at this particular residence. I've seen everything that is being done at the Hillview Park. It's not a baseball park. It is a baseball park. I coached for over 10 years, but that's only in the fall and in the spring. This park is literally a park. It is used by everybody for everything. I was pro a dog park. until the signs went up. And this has become an out of control situation. You've heard from some of the neighbors already. There is no reason to extend this. You've had 6 months to collect plenty of data. It is not working on any level. I have sent all of you my view on this. Recently, Janine Valdez posted a note to this meeting today and articulated all of the various issues very well. There's no sense in repeating them. I've met with the Santa Clara County Parks Recreation director. They managed 3 off-leash parks. They were unaware that Los Altos was doing this. They had numerous ideas, very helpful ideas on how we can do this. I've met with our Parks and Recreation Department. We've identified a couple of areas within the city center where this could be a contained perimeter dog park. I want a dog park, but not at Hillview Park on the baseball field. It's being ruined and it's pushing so many people away from our park. They are avoiding it like the plague, including many local dog owners who don't believe in off leash. They like to walk through the park with leashes on. They don't want to get diseases. They don't want to get into fights. And the barking, it feels like I'm living next to a kennel. At 8 a.m., it goes on for an hour.
Thank you so much for your comments.
Mayor, could I ask a question, please? What the last speaker, real quick. He mentioned something about the Santa Clara County Parks Director. And I'd like to hear more about what that director's recommendations are. If you could just share a few of the recommendations, I'd like to better understand that, please.
Sure. They were extremely helpful. Are willing to sit down with anybody to explain what works and doesn't work. Right off the bat, some of the things that they said is the 3 off-leash parks that they control, some are big, some are small. Number 1 requirement is a perimeter fence. That controls a lot of the issues that we're hearing tonight. But they've got other ideas of how to design it, how to maintain it, how to bring in park benches for people to sit and relax, how to shade it. They've got all sorts of ideas of what works and what doesn't work. And they would be willing to sit with us and tell us how to do this the right way.
Thank you, Jean. And this is really good feedback, and I know staff is listening. So thank you so much for sharing the feedback and the recommendation.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Janine Valadez, followed by Roberta.
Good evening, Council. I am the one that submitted the public comment, so I'm not going to repeat the points that I have made there. I was an active user of the park, always with trepidation about the lack of a perimeter fence, as I have 3 younger dogs. But, I have fallen away from the park for all the reasons that the complainers have cited. And I take my dogs to other parks now, Palo Alto, Los Altos Hills even, and the city of Mountain View to fenced areas. The comments I want to make here are really focused on a couple of things. I absolutely adore the fact that the set of Hillview residents have created community for their human interactions and their social fulfillment. I think that's wonderful. I just think that they're tying that community to a functional area like a dog park is extremely misguided, and it is not a good service to their dogs. And so, if there are other avenues or venues that the city can foster, I would be very much in favor for humans to have casual park social interactions with their dogs, leashed or as long as they're contained. The other comment I want to make has to do with the extension. Mayor Flagger, you made a comment that the extension is only being asked so that we give time for the subcommittee to do its job and work with staff. I do not believe that having this extension in any way is needed to enable the subcommittee to do its job. In fact, it prevents proper analysis of the data because it extends the feedback loop beyond the scope of the hard stop that the committee has defined. If anything, to have a really good amount of data, you need to stop the input and then let the team focus on doing their work, working with staff. So I don't think that having the extension in any way adds value to the assessment of the park. It may
Thank you, Janine. And if you could just say for the record, I know you're a Parks and Rec commissioner, that you were speaking as an individual resident and not as a Parks and Rec commissioner.
Yes, I'm sorry. I am speaking as a private resident and user of the park. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Roberta.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So it appears that, one of the big problems here is enforcement. And, what I understand is that Palo Alto Animal and Los Altos, they're not giving them citations. So I think that some of the information that we need is how many warnings were given, and to have staff, if you extend it or don't extend, make sure that Palo Alto Animal and the police do issue citations. We can't go on for more than 6 months and say, oh, well, people are speeding and we're just giving them warnings. We need to give some people citations, unfortunately. That's the only thing that works. And I just want to say, I do not have a dog in this race. I don't have a dog. And I like the fact that there is community. And obviously there needs to be some suggestions for improvement. And it sounds like there are residents who are more than willing to help improve the process. So just, let's try to make sure the enforcement happens now. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. No more speakers, City Clerk?
No, I have a person by the name of Jean, but I believe they've already spoken.
He did. Okay, thank you. And Jean, if you're listening, if this is your first council meeting, we limit the amount of time for each speaker. And you've already used your time, but thanks again for your feedback and comments. So bringing it back to council for any follow-up questions and or discussion, or if someone wants to make a motion, I'm going to look for panelist hands. And so Mr. Hernandez, quick follow-up based on something a public speaker said, what's the value in extending the pilot program as opposed to ending it? I think it would have been next week or whenever that date is. Could you explain to us the need for extending the program through, I think what you're proposing is November 14th if we wanted a hard date. Go ahead, Mr. Hernandez.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yes, there really is no necessarily a need. However, it is a courtesy. The program is running right now, and I think that's what the Recreation Department is proposing right now. But it's really at council's discretion on what they desire to do with this very limited extension.
Thank you. Mr. England, did you want to add something?
No, that was a perfect answer.
Thank you. Councilmember Meadows.
I think the vice mayor might have been ahead of me unless she lowered her hand. Okay. So I'm a little torn on this. I was initially planning on going with the extension to November 14th, the date certain part is important. And I know we're only talking about the extension of the pilot and not the merits of the pilot itself. And yet I think it's unfair to ignore some of the things that are definitely an issue with this pilot. And that is clearly the lack of this being a contained park. So in light of the incidents that have gone on because of that, and the fact that we did define this as a period to end on the 28th, I guess I'm wavering to voting not to extend the pilot. But I guess that's open to discussion, so.
Thank you, Councilmember Meadows. Who would like to go next? Vice Mayor?
Well, I understand Councilmember Meadows' comments, and I too am concerned, as I think anyone would be, about behaviors that are not conforming to what we had hoped we would see. But I think we also have to realize that a lot of these behaviors are going on outside of the posted hours for the pilot. And that's a bigger problem that I'm sure the Parks and Rec Commission and Mr. Hernandez are going to address. I am inclined to take staff's recommendation. I've found that their work on this issue going back years has always been very sound. And so I would actually move to adopt the ordinance presented with an amendment to the final whereas, which, so that instead of saying, and until such time that the city council receives a recommendation, that instead we put until November 14th, and then that be the hard stop, and that, you know, we're looking forward to the analysis of the Parks and Rec Commission and a final recommendation on what we can do in the city to support our dog lovers who would like to have some off-leash opportunity.
So Vice Mayor, did you put a motion, or are you going to allow for more discussion and then I'll come back to you?
Mayor, if you'd like it to be a motion and have further discussion based on a motion, that's fine. If you want me to hold back and wait till others have spoken, I will hold back.
Let's do the latter. Thank you. Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an issue that I've been dealing with since 2016, 2017, with my time on park. In fact, I was the chair of the commission, and we had a lot of turnover, and I really pushed for this to be an issue that we took on, because having an off-leash, a park for off-leash hours, or a fenced-in park, or both, is something that was mentioned in the parks plan going back to 2012. But even before then, it's an issue that kind of percolates up, but it's very controversial, and then it kind of disappears. I think that the concerns about extending the off-leash program are well stated and well founded. In my experience, though, I've noticed that the people who are most vocal and vehement are the ones whose lives are most likely to have been disrupted or who have encountered bad events. And the Vice Mayor, I believe, pointed out something very important, which is that some of these incidents, if not most of them, have been happening outside of off-leash hours. Some of them, I think, are happening outside of the park itself. The reason that the Parks and Rec Commission actually went forward with examining this and had meetings going till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, discussing this issue, trying to identify parks, looking at every single park, is because off-leash, the use of dogs off-leash is happening in Los Altos. It's happening, it continues to happen. And the thought was, if we have a designated place for people to take their dogs off leash, that will likely make it will limit the amount of well, let me say that. If we have a designated place for people to take their dogs off leash, they will not need to violate the law and cause nuisances and essentially have it be the Wild West with people having their dogs off leash. I am personally really moved by the community that has developed around the park. And full disclosure, I met with 5 or 6 representatives of this community that has formed a week or 2 ago. And some of their stories are just amazing. The community that has developed around this park really, I think, is the start of something special. And it's what we want our city to be. It's what we want our parks to be. We want our parks to be places where our community is activated. And that's exactly what's going on at Hillview right now. I do not mean to minimize or ignore the complaints that people have, because they are real. It is noisier when there are dogs running around on a field than when it is not. People who are afraid of dogs will essentially not be able to use the field during those times, the times they're off-leash hours. I think that Roberta Phillips made an excellent point, which is that enforcement is key to making this program work. It always has been, and it always will be. And if there are instances where enforcement has not been diligent enough, I think we need to look at that. I'm really moved by the offer of members of the off-leash community to work with the city to find ways of improving the program. They're not coming to us saying, everything is perfect, let's keep it going. They're saying that this is a useful program, and we see that it can be made better, and we want to work with the community. We want to work with the city to make it better. For those reasons, I'm in favor of extending the program until the fields are closed.
Thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. Councilmember Lee Ang.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I do want to disclose that I did meet with members of the dog park group. And I do recognize the value of having people have a place to socialize their dogs, and more so during this time where so many people have adopted dogs during COVID. That said, I am as well concerned about safety and making sure that people feel comfortable going to our parks. But I've heard, you know, they're not, what seems to work would be an enclosed area. So even if we were to extend it, I'd like to see how we could extend it, or ask, well, let me ask my questions first of staff. I'm concerned about the staff getting injured by, you know, dog attacks as well as the public. How are we going to ensure enforcement when, you know, our police are tied up? Because as well, you know, we have a lot of vehicles being stolen, and that's their priority. I don't want them going out there to make sure, hey, your dog is off leash during the wrong hours. How are we going to ensure enforcement of this program should it be extended?
Councilmember Ling, yeah, that is something that we're analyzing right now, and we're taking that as some of the information and some of the data, and we'll work with PD and animal control to bring that data back to council at that time once it's been analyzed and brought together.
How long is the period of analysis on that? Because I think we're asking for an extension, but then that means while we're analyzing it, then enforcement's not going to improve, right?
Councilmember Lee, two answers to that question. One, I think the data collection period, I'll ultimately defer to Parks and Rec staff and commission, is probably ended, even if the program is extended, because they would still have to analyze the data that's been collected in time to get it in front of council. With enforcement, we do enforcement based on priority. And if you want a larger answer than that, we can have Chief Galea provide it. But if we get a call for an off-leash dog outside of hours, we're going to respond to that based on what else is happening at the time. So I don't want to set a false narrative that we're going to have an officer or animal control or any staff at the park during the hours that's established. But we do a good job. I've talked with the chief. We do a good job of enforcing the rules around the dog park.
My concern is as well as public safety, because if the first speaker stated he was attacked, my concern is how can we assure that someone's not going to be attacked or get bitten, and that's not someone who's there with the dog. So even though you're raised concern about having some enclosed area, why would you be, if council wanted to provide an enclosed area to extend the this pilot, could we do that?
I think council could give that direction. I was out there with Director Hernandez today. Fencing that part where it's at would be a little difficult because it is on a baseball field. But also, if council is extending the program only for a matter of weeks, that could be quite a significant expense for the next 10 weeks or so. But if council wanted us to look at a way to make that location permanent, for example, when Parks and Rec Commission makes a report back, I do think Director Hernandez and I found some good alternatives to fencing it in at or near that spot.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee Eng. And I'll pick up on Councilmember Lee Eng's questions because I'm also inclined to support the extension through November 14th, which would be 6 more weeks. And I understand it wouldn't make sense for different reasons to install any fencing for the 6-week period. But we've also heard about the dog park not being cleaned up. We've also heard about people being there after hours. And so I wonder if there are other things we can do in the 6-week period to address some of the concerns we have heard. Because to be honest, when this comes back with the full assessment, these are things I would consider about making this permanent. How are we really going to enforce things? And so for the 6-week period, I would like to see, to the extent possible, that staff is proactive in enforcing and addressing some of the concerns we have heard. On the one hand, 6 weeks may not sound like a long time, but it is. And so, Mr. Hernandez or Mr. England, is it possible for us to look at some of the concerns we have heard tonight and over the last week from residents and start addressing some of those concerns?
I think, Mayor, we can look at the concerns of the residents. We can do things like put in call events for extra patrols. If there are people off leash at that location, we can certainly make contact with them and try and do some education. Again, I don't want to set a false narrative that we're going to have an officer there repeatedly or frequently, but we can do extra patrols and make sure that we document any interactions that we have, and then leaving it up to the police officer discretion site as is necessary. So we have heard that clearly tonight that we should have a greater presence there, and I don't think there will be an issue with that.
And Mr. England, I've been to the park. I remember Miss Leggy, I went the first day and talked to other users of the park that first day. And I don't think the community or population that uses the park has changed significantly. And the people I encountered were open and happy and just, excited about the park, but they also definitely came across as reasonable. And the reason why I'm sharing this is I'm wondering if we don't actually need a patrol officer. If someone from Parks and Rec staff goes out there and says it's after hours, I really think that could be equally effective to have people leave. I would not, you have the posted hours, you're saying I'm with the city, wherever you are. I'm sure some of the commissioners on parks would do it. I'm waiting for Janine to say I'll do it. But I don't think we need patrol officers necessarily to enforce the hours. The cleanup, I don't know who on staff would be able to do that on a daily basis just to make sure the park is cleaned up. And I know we heard from the History Museum about dogs leaving things on their patio. So those are two things I actually think staff can address in the next 6 weeks.
So I appreciate the feedback. We can ask Parks and Rec staff to do that. We do clean the park regularly, and one of the issues with when the History Museum made their complaint, for example, they're well away from the off-leash dog park, so staff wouldn't necessarily be going to their doorstep to look to clean there. I think our crew does a good job of regularly cleaning, but again, when it's off leash, it kind of expands outside of the area that we're looking at to clean. So we have heard the feedback clearly, and again, we'll have a higher presence there for the remaining time.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to the vice mayor because she was ready to make a motion. Vice Mayor?
Mayor, thank you. I would like to move the adoption of resolution number 2021-50, extending the off-leash pilot program at the Hillview Baseball Field and making findings pursuant to CEQA that the resolution is categorically exempt from environmental review with the following amendment: that the final whereas in the resolution as presented by staff be changed following the date of September 28, 2021, and until November 14, 2021, period. And striking the words "and until such time that the City Council receives a recommendation from the park and council takes action."
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Before I go to Councilmember Weinberg, I see the city attorney waving her hand. Ms. Houston.
Okay. Oh, good. I'm unmuted. So then under section 1, which is, so it says it shall be extended until, we repeat that, until November 14th, 2021. So we need to put it both in the whereas and in the therefore be it resolved. So
I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you.
I'm awake.
Thank you. So motion by the Vice Mayor, Councilmember Weinberg.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Weinberg. City Clerk, can you please?
No, friendly amendment.
Go ahead.
I wanted in there that it will be returning to council on November, because I think that way we can ensure that it comes back to council and we can address it right away.
I don't believe we can put that into this resolution. I think it needs to be a separate direction to staff, and I'm happy to do that following the action on this motion.
Okay, because I believe we've done it before where it comes back to us and specific date. That's why it's before us, because we specifically gave some clear dates. So
Councilmember Lee Eng, the maker of the motion, isn't receptive to that friendly amendment. So City Clerk, can you please?
Under the understanding it couldn't be, but just to help her understand it can be. So I would have appreciated if we could put it in the motion that it returns to council on November 30th for the council meeting.
And we would need staff to figure out when it comes back. But so we have a motion by the Vice Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Weinberg. City Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Sure. Councilmember Meadows.
I want to disclose, I also spoke with members of the public associated with the dog park, since we're all disclosing it. Out of an abundance of caution, I will vote no.
Councilmember Lee Eng.
Yes.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Enander.
Yes.
And Mayor Flyer.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes 4-1.
And Mayor, may I ask Mr. Hernandez, what is the current plan for schedule for parks and their target date for bringing this to council again, just for the record?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. No, I do not have a target date for bringing it back to council. I believe there's 2 council meetings between the time that they are going to address this, which is October 13th. So it's probably going to be, it's targeted as one of the council meetings after that.
And Vice Mayor, just a little additional information. It was actually the Parks and Rec subcommittee, as I understand it, that asked us to delay bringing this to council. That was what Director Legge had relayed to me. So I would ask that as we get direction to bring it back, we do it within the parameters of what the Parks and Rec subcommittee or the Parks Commission subcommittee had asked as a courtesy.
And what was their outside target date?
Again, without Director Leahy, I'm not entirely sure tonight. I apologize for that. She did relay that they had asked to delay it, but I don't think it would be beyond the end of November. But I don't have a specific answer.
Then I would like to give direction to staff with the concurrence of my colleagues that we'd like to see this on our agenda no later than, we do have a meeting on November 30th. Is that the one that's got moved? Yes.
Correct, that is.
No later than November 30, unless there are exigent circumstances that the city manager conveys to council.
So I see that's direction, not a motion, so it would be done by consensus, but I want to go to Councilmember Weinberg. Go ahead, Councilmember Weinberg.
Thanks. So I attended the last Parks and Recreation Commission meeting. I believe that they have this planned for their agenda at their next meeting. Wait, let's say, I guess it's next month. So they're planning to take it up. Rather than setting some kind of a date certain, I think it would make sense to let Park handle it first, see where they go with it, see what makes sense to them to do with it. I don't think that we really have an urgency to get this done by the end of November, because one way or another, the fields are going to be closed through January anyway. So I think it would behoove us to let Park chew on this a little bit, no pun intended, and see what they come back with, what their recommendation is, at least in terms of the process.
Yeah, my concern is that the data, the information, the feedback and so on will get stale if we let this keep going. And December is a lost month. We are unlikely to get much in the way of any businesses won't get scheduled into December. And I don't want this to carry over to January.
So I'll weigh in. I also don't think we should have a date certain. I can imagine that staff is going to get this to us as soon as possible. And I agree with Councilmember Weinberg that knowing our Parks and Rec Commission, they may need a couple meetings to chew on it and assess it to give us any kind of recommendation. And so although I support the idea of bringing it back to us as soon as possible, I would not support putting a date certain in directing staff to bring it back. Councilmember Liang.
The only reason why I would like to see it come before us as soon as possible is because we have a end date for the pilot, and having it come back to us perhaps the end of November, beginning of December, would allow us to move forward on giving direction on one of the recommendations. Those people, come spring, they will be left hanging without a location in which to take their dogs. And our goal is to, we don't want it to come back again and say, oh, let's have another pilot at the Hillview. But the point is, we want to give them something where they can take their dogs to. So I think that's why clearly I would like to make sure that the staff understands, the last meeting of November, well, as soon as possible, that's the main thing. And so that we can make sure that we address the concerns of the residents and address the concerns and making sure to provide that social opportunity for four-legged friends.
Thank you, Councilmember Liang. Mr. England, so Vice Mayor, I see your direction. I don't think there is three of us supporting a specific date, but it's clear we're all saying as soon as possible. So I want to check with Mr. England to make sure it's clear what we mean.
Mayor, we will work with the Parks Commission and let them know the direction they have received is to review this and provide a recommendation to council as soon as possible.
So if we're talking about pilots, can I ask for one more thing? Or I don't know.
Last question, Councilmember Liang, go ahead.
Maybe we can ask, it needs to be just like how Los Altos Hills gave us a letter to explore the trail. Can we send a letter can we ask that you as a mayor send a letter to the city of Mountain View to explore another pilot at the Cuesta Annex. And we look at partnering. Oh, the city attorney's nodding her head, maybe not. Okay, So when it comes back, city manager and Mr.
You're
Hernandez.
outside of the scope, Councilmember Lee Egg. You're outside of the scope.
Okay, I'll do future agenda items. Thank you.
It's a good idea, but just not here. Now, are we not changing until November 14th, 2021, or are we just now not having a date? Just
No, we already
No, we
voted
said
on that.
November 14th.
Okay, that's done.
Okay.
And we're closing the item now. So unless I see Mr. England pop up on my screen, we're going to close item number 5 and then go to item number 6. And I think Mr. Maginot will be presenting this item as well.
Yeah, and this one will even be shorter than the last item I introduced. I don't have much to add beyond what's in the staff report, as indicated there. With the signing of AB 361 into law, the city now has the option to continue all virtual meetings until the end of January, provided that the city is under an emergency declaration, which the city currently is. And so, in August, we had some information and got direction from council, and now with this new bill that has been passed, wanted to get council's direction on how we conduct council and commission meetings moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Maginot, and thanks for being on top of all these new laws. Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Maginot, thank you very much for the staff report. If we go back to in-person meetings, of course, we can't have it in the council chambers because it's still under construction. So if we have our meetings at Hillview, could you walk through the process that it takes to prepare it for a council meeting or a commission meeting? How does it get set up to make sure that it's televised? Just everything that goes in. So how much staff time is involved, how many people are needed, and how much it costs for each meeting to get it set up?
Sure. So one of the advantages that we have if we move to having council meetings in the community center is we had about 1.5 years of experience in setting up remote meetings when we were meeting in the youth center. And so we do have a process to get it set up. I'm not entirely sure how long it takes the maintenance crew, but I think they can be done in less than an hour with a couple of them setting up the room. We then have our folks from KMBT who are fantastic in helping us set up the video equipment. We'll have a member of the IT division who will help us with some of the other technology needs. All told, I would estimate staff time maybe 3 or 4 hours combined between all of the staff to get it set up. Cost is minimal, and the reason why it's minimal is even though we are using KMVT for the broadcasting of council and planning commission meetings, we already had a contract with them to come and use the equipment that was in the council chambers. And so those costs are now being used to have them come and bring their equipment. And there's a little additional cost, but I couldn't give you exactly how much more per meeting it is. And I think there was another part of the question that maybe I missed.
No, I think you answered the question. So
Okay.
what I'm hearing is that we're looking at about 3 to 4 hours of staff time, minimal cost in order to prepare for and broadcast and then break down the live meetings.
I did not include the breaking down, so add another couple hours of staff time. Okay.
And is that true for every commission meeting as well?
Commissions, it will be significantly less. We, prior to COVID, we're not broadcasting, with the exception of the Planning Commission, we're not video broadcasting commission meetings. And so there's not the additional cost of KMVT, nor the need to set up camera equipment, et cetera. The current plan unless council provides direction differently, is that the city council and the planning commission will meet in the, and I apologize, I have not memorized the trees yet, but the large community room. And then the remainder of the commissions, there may be one more that I think maybe design review is also going to meet there. The remainder of the commissions are going to meet in one of the, it's very big, but it's smaller than the large community room. And the setup will generally be the same and can take, frankly, I can do it for myself, for the commission that a commission that I staff, I can set it up in 15, 20 minutes.
All right. Is it possible for you to put a dollar figure per month on how much it would cost us?
In terms of
having live meetings, what it's going to cost the city to set up 2 council meetings, 1 or 2 planning commission meetings a month?
Is he asking you to do math again, Mr. McAdoo?
I know.
I think he is.
I'm putting you on the spot, John. If you don't have the figures in front of you, I get it.
Well, I was going to say, as of yesterday, I was no longer the finance director, so the math doesn't work for me anymore. No, I hesitate to give an estimate simply because I'm not entirely sure what the cost of the maintenance workers and the IT crew staff are. Those, of course, are not dollar amounts that the city is paying, but lost time that the staff could be spending on something else. The contract with KMVT, again, we're going to pay that regardless, because we have our KMVT staff who is attending the planning and city council meetings anyways, and helping with the live streaming on YouTube and getting it out that way. So additional cost, I don't know that there would be a significant dollar amount that I could place on it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. Councilmember Meadows.
Thank you. So I don't see it so much as a cost issue. To me, the more overriding factor is, health and emergency declaration related. So, and my question is, so we can decide to meet in person or to continue remotely under AB 361. So, but right now in Los Altos, we're under an emergency declaration, which allows us to do that. But if we decide to go ahead and meet in person, which is fine, whatever we as a group decide to do, how do we differentiate if that emergency gets more serious and then we say, oh, well, we should go back to remote? Or if we have a different emergency, so this one goes away and another time we have a different emergency, how do we differentiate the degrees of the emergency that allow us to decide whether we should be meeting in person or meeting remotely? And to me, that is sort of the bigger issue, rather than, because if all else is equal, we will be holding public meetings and paying the money to do so. But right now we're under an emergency declaration with AB 361 that allows us to meet remotely. So if we make a decision not consistent, there comes the city attorney, not consistent with, so if this emergency is not of the magnitude that would prevent us from meeting in person, how do we know when it does, if it turns course or if there's a different emergency? I guess that question is not very clear, but you probably get where I'm going with it.
Well, I'll start and then the city attorney can correct everything that I say wrong. A couple of the aspects of AB 361 is that in order to continue to meet virtually, the city has to redeclare or continue the state of emergency. And we've internally in staff, we've had some confusion whether it's 30 days or 60 days. We've settled on 30 days. So every month we are planning to bring an item to declare the state of emergency. I would see those, if council were to say, we think that circumstances are such that we can have in-person meetings, and say a month from now things get worse. Of course, we have the recertification or the redeclaration of the state of emergency, in which we could add findings that say, hey, things have gotten a lot worse. And so that would be a natural opportunity to then sort of change tact where we're going. The other aspect is, I believe, so AB 361 sunsets on January 31 of 2022. So in reality, we're looking at another 4 months. And hopefully there is not another emergency that comes up beyond the one that we're currently in.
No, I agree with what John said, because the emergency declaration statute says you need to renew it every 60 days, but then the AB 361 said needs to be ratified every 30 days. And so we're going to be going with the 30 days. And I think the way it's drafted is it's allowing local agencies to determine if they can meet in person, if they can do the social distancing. They're, I think, giving us some flexibility, but they're not mandating that you do one or another. But we can continue that emergency declaration and stay virtual until we get more, get things worked out.
Okay. Mayor, you're muted. I didn't hear whether the city attorney's last comment was we can or can't, I think. Sorry, now you're muted.
No, we can continue under our own local emergency. We're under, at the end of September, but we've already ratified ours. So we're already under our existing one, and we can just keep coming back every 30 days and see how it's working and see how, how it is. And do we need to come back in person? Do we want to come back in person? Or, what's happening with the health issues?
Thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you, Councilmember Meadows. And I'll just add to what has already been said in response to your question. I mean, it clearly is an attempt to give jurisdictions flexibility. So for example, there are 15 cities in Santa Clara County. We're all experiencing the same emergency, but every city is deciding to do something a little bit different, right? And so if there was a bar or a standard across the board, then we would all be making that same determination. But there are cities who are doing hybrid, there's some who are going back full-time, there's some who are opting to do remote. And so I really think it's a subjective determination if, as a city, we believe we can return to in-person safely based on the emergency we're all experiencing. Who would like to go next? Again, questions for Mr. Maginot or staff? So Mr. Maginot, let me ask about the hybrid. I know in Sunnyvale, they opted to do a hybrid approach where council, the city clerk, and the city manager, and possibly the deputy city manager, are back in person. And they have given the public the option of either showing up in the chambers or still being able to participate via Zoom. And they also allow staff to, not the city manager or the city clerk. The mayor didn't mention the city attorney, so I don't know where you are, Jolie, but they have come up with a hybrid approach where council is back, city clerk, and the city manager in person. They do allow members of the public to also appear in person, but they still have the Zoom option that allows the public to call in and also staff. Could we have such a setup? And going to Councilmember Weinberg's question about cost, and the time demands and resource demands of doing a hybrid approach. Can you speak to that?
Sure. You know, quite frankly, if that's the direction that council gives us, that's the direction we'll go and we'll make it work. I will say that it may take us a few meetings to iron out any of the kinks or the hiccups. Using under a hybrid approach, we probably would need some additional staff support during the meeting. Our poor city clerk has a lot going on during any sort of council meeting, and trying to juggle in-person, remote. We would probably need some help for her, as well as making sure that things are running smoothly. So I would anticipate that a hybrid meeting would have some additional staff needs. I would not anticipate there would be any additional costs other than staff time.
Thank you, Mr. Maginot. Vice Mayor?
Quick question for whoever knows the answer. Where do we stand with the state on mandating vaccination for employers or for assembled meetings of X size or whatever?
Vice Mayor, the only mandate we're aware of right now is the federal mandate that applies to all employers who have 100 employees or more to either be vaccinated or test weekly. The mandate has been issued, but the orders from OSHA have not been written yet, though I do think they're coming soon. And we haven't heard what the state plans to do. They could be writing their own going further or simply complying. But I think once we see the orders from Cal OSHA, we'll have a more clear answer on that.
Thank you. That's the only question I have.
Thank you. So let's go to the public to see if anybody has any comments on this agenda item number 6. City Clerk?
So far, I see one hand, and that is Roberta.
Okay, let's give Roberta 2 minutes.
Okay.
Hi, this is Roberta. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm really happy to hear about this AB 361, which does give you the ability to every 30 days evaluate it. I would prefer that we take advantage of that. And, you know, I know that people would like to get back to normal. I certainly would also. But the fact is, you know, we just can't rush it. It's, you know, going to happen as it happens. And, you know, if you decide that you are going to move forward, I certainly would really appreciate a hybrid solution. Yes. You know, council, well, you know, we have a large senior population. I think it's really difficult for them, and they are the most vulnerable because the vaccine still, you can still get COVID even if you've been vaccinated, and people still need to wear masks, and council members and staff still needs to go to the bathrooms, which are small, and we'll have difficulty with social distancing there. So I think that, you know, you should keep things as they are now, as virtual, and 30 days from now, 60 days from now, when John Maginot brings it back, we can see where things are at then. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. Okay, we're going to bring it back to council. I don't think we have any more public speakers.
No, I do not see any more hands, Mayor.
Who would like to put a proposal on the table? And it sounds like, again, nobody feels strongly about any of the 3 options. So maybe Mr. Maginot can just tell us what's best for staff. Oh, I see someone's hand is raised. Vice Mayor.
I'd be happy to hear what Mr. Maginot has to say.
I mean, does anybody, go ahead, Mr. Maginot.
Well, I was hoping that that your suggestion might have gone unnoticed and the council would have the way in. Of course, and the city manager's on again to make sure I don't say anything he disagrees with, but staff will make whatever the council directs work. Certainly, well, I'll just leave it at that.
So when would we otherwise next be considering an extension of the emergency order?
30 days.
I believe we'll have it on your next council agenda, which is the
October 12th.
12th of October.
12th of October. Okay, what my suggestion is that we should not plan now to go back into in person. I think there's still enough uncertainty in what's happening with the Delta variant and breakthrough infections and the prospect that we're actually going to be allowed to offer vaccine to additional people here soon. But I know our cases are still going up in our city. They haven't stopped. So I would like to see us at least defer until the November or the October decision on extending, whether we extend the emergency order. And then if we extend the emergency order and we wanted to, or if we didn't want to extend the emergency order, we could decide at that point to come starting at the next meeting as in person. Is that correct?
Well, if
a notice period with terminating the emergency order.
And the city attorney can weigh in as well, but if the council were to not extend the emergency declaration, we would be subject to all provisions of the Brown Act as currently written. We would not be able to, we would not be subject to the provisions of AB 361, in which case we would move back to in-person, back to having a physical meeting location and all teleconference locations properly noticed and open to the public.
But we'd put that on at the end of the agenda so that it didn't go into effect right away if we changed our mind.
Well, one thing that you could do is you just have to have a meeting location.
Yeah.
So if there are people that aren't comfortable with attending the council meeting in person, they could meet in the Redwood room, and people that want to speak can be out in the council chambers or speak someplace at City Hall. And so there's a way that we could do that if we needed to accommodate people. But John and I talked about that. I think we did that early, well, but the city did that earlier at some other time. So if you don't feel comfortable posting your home address, you could post the City Hall address and take the meeting from there. Isn't that correct, John? We did
Yeah,
that.
I mean, we could figure out how to make it work, but to the vice mayor's question, if the council were to not extend the emergency declaration or find that the emergency is over, then the provisions of AB 361 would not apply to the city, and so we would be back to having a physical meeting location.
Yeah, and it would be the teleconferencing rules that we all know about.
Well, I'll just say I'm not prepared to go back into in-person meetings at this time.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. And Mr. Maginot, what's the lead time for staff if we wanted to go back in person? And I'm also considering that the parks team is slowly moving back into moving into the community center. And I would want them to be settled before we started having meetings in there. So I think that transition period is important. But what's the lead time? So for example, go ahead.
All right, sorry to cut you off. I'll add some information because the council provided the direction back in August that we asked you to provide. We have worked with the recreation staff to make sure that the rooms and the facilities that are needed for each of the council and commission meetings are set aside through, I believe, through February is what we set it as, just to on the safe side. And so the spaces themselves are already booked. Now, if the council says, well, we're not gonna, we're gonna not go back into person, then we'd probably start releasing some of the earlier meetings, but holding the later ones. I would say we would probably want at least 2 meetings notice to be safe. But I mean, we could make it work with a meeting's notice.
A month's notice.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing that we need to be aware of is if we go back to planning commission meetings or DRC or meetings that have the 10-day published notice, we need to be able to notice where the meeting will be held, if it's going to be virtual or in City Hall or something like that. And those notices are a 10-day notice, but the way it is with the local papers, it's really about a 2-week or a 3-week notice. It's hard to get those. So we'll need a little bit of lead time for those types of planning notices.
And that's a great point that I neglected to think about. And so I'll retract my statement of we can do it on a meeting's notice. So we would need about a month.
Yvonne thanks you, John.
Andrea,
okay, so
thanks
I
you
got
as
my
well.
question answered. So at least a month's lead time. And then the follow-up, because I don't think we have touched on it yet. Hypothetically, if we as council said we wanted to go back in person, does that mean our commissions also have to go back in person?
That's a tricky question. If the council is stating that the emergency is not severe enough, or the state of the emergency in the city is such that the council can meet in person, we may have a difficult time making findings that the commissions cannot meet in person. The converse is the same as well. If the council is saying that the emergency is great enough that we need to continue virtually, then we would not say, but the commissions, it's not as bad for the commissions, so they can meet in person. So I would say whatever the direction that the council goes for council meetings is what we would follow for commissions as well.
Okay, I don't see any hands, and the vice mayor strongly indicated that she'd prefer that we continue remotely, at least for now. And so unless there's strong objection to that, and we'll obviously revisit it again in October, I'm comfortable supporting that. Councilmember Meadows.
Yeah, I'm not objecting to that. I just want to clarify, and I think this is true, but you're not saying like if we voted October 12th to not renew the emergency declaration, then all of a sudden we all have to get up and run over to the community center in the middle of a meeting. No, right?
No. So, I mean, the October 12th meeting will still be under, falling under the state of emergency within the city. The council that night, if you chose not to extend it, would simply be saying, we're not extending it. So it would, it's over, but the meeting would still be properly noticed as an all virtual meeting.
Okay, but you said you need.
But it might be fun to watch the council try to hurry over to the community center.
I'm sure it would be. Some of us would be faster than others, but so you said you need a month's notice. So I'm just running these logistics through my head. So, but if we decided whatever date that we're not continuing the emergency, that doesn't give you the month's notice to make. Yeah. So
yeah, you're right. And speaking hypothetically, because it's not an agenda item, there's probably a different way to do it, such to say that we believe the emergency will end at this point, and that's the direction that we go. So not to get too much into it, but we could figure out a way to make it work.
All right, good. So I would support the proposal on the table.
Thank you. And do we need a motion here? Councilmember Lee Eng, I see your hand, but I just want to check. Do you need a motion, Mr. Maginot?
I don't believe, yes. Yes.
I see Mr. England, yes. Okay, so unless Councilmember Lee Eng, I'm going to go to you. If you're ready to make a motion, take it away.
Well, I actually was going to have a question. So when you're prepared, if you decide to come back, I heard from a lot of seniors that when we videotaped at Lacey, they had a lot of problems seeing the council meetings clearly. There was a lot of issues with that TV setup. So I'm glad we're taking the direction that we're taking, because I'm hearing from a lot of people that this is so much better, that they can hear us, they can see us better. And so thank you so much. And, you know, Vice Mayor, if you want to make the motion, I'd be glad to second your motion.
So I move that we do not plan for return to in-person council meetings at this time, and defer further action until at least consideration of the next potential renewal of the emergency order. Will that suffice?
I'm good with that.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by the Vice Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Lee Eng. City Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Sure. Councilmember Weinberg,
I want to go back to in-person meetings soon, but I vote yes.
Councilmember Liang,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Mayor Fliger,
I share Councilmember Weinberg's sentiments. Yes.
and Vice Mayor Enander.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, City Clerk. Thanks, Mr. Maginot. Okay, so next we will move on to item number 1, which was pulled by Councilmember Lee Eng. And so I know our City Clerk is the staff assigned to that items, but I'm going to start with Councilmember Lee Eng to see if she had a specific question.
So I had some concerns because we never really got to, I mean, we got it flashed, the 6.8 flashed when we were talking about it, and the finished language never made the minutes. So I really could not see the language, and I still had some concerns about it. So I am just saddened that it never really made it for the public to review, because if anything, that is a material change, and a big material change. So I am disappointed. So that said, I just wanted to make that comment, and you guys can go ahead and pass it if you want.
Okay, so you wanted to make the comment, and I think that comment, Councilmember Lee Eng, could have been made during the consent calendar, but thanks for the comment. Because it got pulled, we're going to treat it like a normal discussion item. I don't see any more hands, and I don't know if the City Clerk has a response to the comment, but we will go to attendees to see if they have any comment on this item, and then we'll bring it back for a vote or discussion. And City Clerk, I see you have your video on. I didn't know if you wanted to respond.
My only response is I'm happy to do whatever the council wishes. I can incorporate that. I have that language, so it's up to the council.
Right. No, thank you. And we voted to adopt the updated norms with the amendments as discussed. And we've done that with so many other items. And so we followed a process, City Clerk, that I know we have done many times, but thank you for that. So then let's go to the public. I see one hand raised.
That's correct. It's Roberta.
So let's give Roberta 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yes. Hi. Yes, I would like to see that, I think it was 6.8 in the minutes, because it was on our screen. We really couldn't read it. We get different interpretations from different people. And just as a matter of record and, good government and professionalism, I would like to see it included in the minutes, so that we don't have to be, making public record requests from Andrea to go see it. that would just be available to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. And I will just add that we made many changes to the norms. And so it would be unfair to the city clerk to pick and choose which of the many changes we made would get incorporated in the minutes. But I expect that we will have the updated norms posted shortly. And so the public will have an opportunity to see the updated version, as opposed to just having the city clerk say, well, for 6.8, I'm going to put the language in, but not for 9.1. There's no 9.1. I just said that randomly. So thank you. I'm going to bring it back to council for any further discussion. And if not, I would entertain a motion to approve the city council minutes from September 14th, 2021. Councilmember Weinberg.
So moved.
We have a motion by Councilmember Weinberg, Councilmember Meadows.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Meadows. City Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Sure. Vice Mayor Enander,
Yes.
Mayor Fliger,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee Ing,
No.
and Councilmember Weinberg.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes 4-1.
Thank you. And then our last discussion item for the evening is our legislative subcommittee update. Subcommittee members, do you have an update for us today?
I'm sorry, Mr. Weinberg, did you want to say something? Your hand is raised. Oh, sorry. My apologies to the city clerk. I thought we had said last meeting that we would not have anything to report at this meeting, but would instead report at our next meeting what the governor has actually signed.
So next meeting, you mean October 12th? So we should have it on
Yes.
October 12th agenda. Okay, thanks.
Yes, we should have the October 12th, and we'll do a final report at that time as to which measures were actually signed or accepted by the governor. If he doesn't sign them, if he doesn't veto them, they automatically become law. So it's not always just what he signed, it's what became law.
Yep, and he's already signing many. Okay, so with that, then this item is, we noticed it, and I know the city attorney will tell me this because I used to do this. So we noticed it. There may be members of the public who are here to speak to this item. So let's just quickly check to see if there are any members of the public who would like to speak to this item.
Madam Mayor, I do not see any members of the public indicating a desire to speak.
Thank you. Okay, and thanks again, subcommittee. So next we have informational items, and it's just there for us to review. And so we will move to council staff reports and directions on future agenda items. And Mr. England, because we have been talking for the last 4 hours, we're gonna have you start us off.
I've got no items to report, Mayor.
Okay, thanks, Mr. England. So council, back to us. Who would like to get us started on reports and requests for future agenda items? And you don't have to. Councilmember Meadows.
So I have no report. We've only had a week since we were last all together, and thank you staff for that turnaround, because it's it's a really tight turnaround for all of us. So I appreciate that. I don't know if this is an agenda item for us, or staff can correct me, but with the bills that have been signed into law, and SB 9 specifically, which refers to objective standards throughout, and I don't know if the objective standards we just passed are going to be sufficient, or there needs to be some other residential thing, or are we covered? So if not, then potentially that's an agenda item, but it doesn't necessarily start with council, but I just wanted to mention that.
So great,
Yeah,
Councilmember, Vice Mayor. So Councilmember Meadows, let's go to the city attorney and the city manager to respond.
Well, what I was going to say is we are going to be putting together staff training, planning commission training, and of course, council training as well on 8, 9, and 10. But for 9, the objective standards that would need to be adopted before January, that's a real tight turnaround. I know I spoke with the city manager. Well, today's only Tuesday, so I guess I spoke to him yesterday about it, but we were, and trying to get them adopted, it was just like when SB 330 passed in the fall and people scrambled to get objective standards, and look how long it took us to get our objective standards in place. So I think we could look at doing it, but I'm going to defer to the city manager. I'm not sure how we could comply with that deadline.
Yeah, and I believe the objective standards would also have to go through the Planning Commission first. So it's multiple meetings with multiple notices. Having said that, I think the first step, when I talked with the city attorney, was putting together a legal memo for council that we'll get out on 9 and 10, and then listening for individual feedback and determining what the best approach is.
One thing that Nisa and Jonathan could do, because you're at the league, you might be talking to people about how they're going to scramble and try to get this done, because it really is a short time period.
And my follow-up, and I know you're going to get us the memo, is really clarification on, do we really need the objective standards to be in place by January 1st, or we just need to get started on it, and as soon as they're in place, just like we did with the multi-residential units objective standards. So, you know, it's a better understand, because everybody's talking about by January 1st, 2022. And I know there's no way we can get them in place by January 1st, but I imagine if we get started on them, whenever they get done, and then we're able to put them in place. So that clarity would really help. Okay, so anything else, Councilmember Meadows, any other reports or requests for future agenda items?
No, that's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Liang.
Thank you. I'm glad we're getting that memo, because I had that concern and raised that concern. There are some other things I'd like to ask for future agenda items. So I know that you are the, you and the vice mayor are, you and the vice mayor are on the outreach committee for the housing element. Number one, I'd like to know if we as a council will be getting update and could provide some suggestions if we feel it was important before the process began, or has it began?
So I can, and Mr. England, please weigh in here. So we've definitely started the process. We've had a couple of meetings. I know they're finalizing the actual outreach engagement plan. On our tentative calendar, you'll see that's actually something we plan to do. We do plan to bring it to council.
Okay.
And so that is definitely part of the plan, but we don't have the final outreach engagement strategy plan yet. And so we have nothing to share yet.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it came to council first. The other thing was, we have contracts, and I think it's important for us to adhere to our contracts. So I know that in one of our contracts of one of our employees, a review is due, and that's with the city attorney. So I don't know how that process is, that we state that we're exceeded the timeline in the contract. So I wanted to bring it to your attention so we can all get it on our calendar. The other thing is I'd like to get on the agenda for another dog park option for us to discuss, is to send a letter to the mayor of Mountain View to have a collaborative dog park option for Mountain View as well as Los Altos.
I'm going to take the two proposed items separately. And for the city attorney review of it, we just all need to look at the contract and comply with it. So that's not really a future agenda item, but thanks for reminding us. On the dog park option, sending a letter to Mountain View. I imagine we'll need staff to help with that. So you would need 3 votes. And let's see if there are 3 votes, and it's not votes, but 3 council members who support
Actually, it wouldn't need staff. It wouldn't need a staff to write.
So who would draft the letter?
Well, it's either a council member, as you know, or you can assign a council member, and I'd be glad to do that. But I think we have to have
so you're volunteering to draft. So you're proposing future. Okay.
And then I think the point is to have that discussion, because there's a wonderful opportunity for us to look at Cuesta Annex. And
so you know what?
And I don't want to go.
Ms. Mary Lee, you're correct. You are correct. To put it on the agenda, no staff work is necessary. It's if we decide to do it, staff work would be necessary. So you only need a second vote to agendize a discussion on whether or not we want to send a letter. Thank you. All right. Who would like to second this discussion item, and we'll put it on our tentative and get it on our agenda? Vice Mayor, your hand is raised. Is it to second the request?
Yes, and then to speak.
Okay, let Councilmember Lee Eng finish. So we have that. So it will go on the future agenda items list. The city attorney, I've noted that. So we'll be in touch with scheduling that, looking at the contract and making sure we schedule that. Anything else, Councilmember Lee Eng?
No, I think you already addressed the other 2 items that I had concerns with. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
So I have already spoken with the city manager about the issue that Councilmember Meadows raised, which is the need for objective standards. And what I would like to suggest is that at the October 6th Design Review Commission meeting and the October 7th Planning Commission meeting, that we ask the commissions to at least highlight any simple changes that might be made fairly immediately, that could be made by January 1st to our zoning codes, that would be improved objective standards in areas where they have expertise with respect to multifamily housing, or because it's going to be considered, and this is the question that the city attorney is going to have to deal with, are SB 9 projects going to be considered multifamily housing? And if so, how are they treated in our zoning code? Which provisions do they fit under? And therefore, what are we really going to change, or what can we really do? Because I think there are a very few simple objective things we could put in place fairly quickly, even with running them through the Planning Commission. And even if we didn't make it by January 1, if the projects haven't been filed on January 1, and then it doesn't matter. I mean, in one sense, January 1 doesn't matter. In another sense, anything that comes in between January 1 and when we would do the standards, we'd be in kind of deep water. So.
No, I think there's this expectation January 1st is going to be a flood of projects, applications. So everybody wants to get their objective standards, but I don't expect that will happen.
No, but there are some provisions in those laws that, if we would deal with them quickly, would make our life easier.
So let me go to the city attorney and the city manager, because the vice mayor is proposing that we take to the Design Review Commission and the Planning Commission a request to start looking at potential objective standards in light of SB 9 and possibly, well, let's just stick with SB 9. But I know the city manager and city attorney had talked about preparing a legal memo first, so everybody understood the requirements. And I don't know if that's something that we would need in place before asking the Design Review and Planning Commissioners to start working on this.
So Mayor, I think that would be at the discretion of council. If council is giving direction, which is under their purview, to the Planning Commission or Design Review Commission to start looking at this, we would be happy to put it on their agenda. We could do it in unison with the legal memo, or we could wait until we get the legal memo and then go forward. It's really up to council direction.
So I can start us off. My preference, and I'm even putting on my commissioner hat, before I'd want to delve into this, I would want to fully understand the law and what I'm working with so we don't run afoul of the law, you know? And so I would want to make sure they get—
That'll be 3 years from now.
3 years from now to do what?
To understand the law.
Well, I'm hoping the legal memo—
That's what happened with SB 35.
Well, I'm hoping whatever legal memo the city attorney is working on or will work on will shed some light, even if it's not, you know, the full light on. But so that's my preference, and this is not a voting item. It really needs 3 people to give this direction to staff to put it on the design. My preference is to have the legal memo done first before, and then we give it to our commissioners so they understand what they're considering, versus just—
How quickly can our city attorney get something pulled together that would be sufficient for the commissions?
Within a week or 10 days, I would say.
So I think we might be still okay to try for the 6th and 7th.
So let's give that direction, that I could support it. So Mr. England, you know, the direction is to get something on the Design Review Commission and Planning Commission after they've had an opportunity to review the city attorney's memo. So whenever that is, I don't want to put a date on it because it just depends. Is that clear, Mr. England?
It's clear, Mayor.
Okay, thanks.
I had a clarifying question for that direction that you guys are providing. So yes, we all agree with that, and I definitely agree with that. So even though it comes back, I want to make sure that when it comes back to us, because like everybody said, this has to be done by January or by the end of the year. I want to make sure that we can meet those timelines, because if we're giving them chance to look at it, it's got to go to Planning Commission two meetings in a row, because they're going to take more, they're going to need more than one meeting. And then it's going to come to us probably by the first meeting in December. So I'm just looking at the timelines of all this. I mean, we have—
And I think we've all accepted, we'll do the best we can, everybody involved, but I think we've all accepted that it's highly unlikely we'll get something in place by January 1st. But we're all going to, you know, staff, commissioners, do our best to get something in place as soon as possible. Okay.
But the direction should be that they should be able to call special meetings if need to.
I mean, I don't want to just speak. So, you know, anybody else wants to respond? I don't support that. I think we move through the process as we would, because I think even with special meetings and the holidays, it still won't get done by January. We just went through an objective standards process that took almost 2 years. And SB 9, as the Vice Mayor pointed out, you know, it takes a lot of explaining. So I do want to move Councilmember Liang. I think there's clear direction. Mr. England indicated he understood. Councilmember Weinberg, I'm going to come to you for any reports or requests for future agenda items. I think you're the only one left before I will do a quick report, and then we can wrap up.
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing to report, and I have no future agenda items to suggest.
Thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. So my first request, and going back to Mr. Maginot's discussion, I would like to request that before the mid-year review, that staff brings back the proposal on how, the discussion item on how we can use the ARPA funds. And I'm not going to put a date on it, but I definitely don't want to wait until the mid-year budget. This does require 2 other council members to support it. I see the Vice Mayor has raised her hand. Okay, so we all want to figure out how we can use this money for the better of our community, or to make sure that we have strong reserves, however we plan to use it. So I'll leave it up to you, Mr. England and Mr. Maginot, to get that on the calendar. Okay, and then just two quick announcements. One, again, a reminder on October 2nd, Saturday, October 2nd, we have our ribbon cutting ceremony and tours for our new community center. And if residents aren't able to attend the in-person ceremony, which will be outdoors, they can either watch it on the city's YouTube website, or they can also watch the recording at a later time. And we will also be offering tours of the community center starting that week, October 4th. So look forward to seeing many of you there. It's an exciting time for the community and something to celebrate, especially based on the year and a half we've all just been through. The other thing I wanted to announce is that we have scheduled the anti-bias training, the first anti-bias training session for October 19th at 6 p.m. This will be an online Ring Central training, and it will be for council members, commissioners, and residents and staff to call in and listen in and participate in this 1-hour anti-bias training. And that's all that I have. Thank you again for a good meeting. Thanks, staff. And with that, I will adjourn our meeting at 10:43 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.